It was the year 2078, the third year after the end of the world August. The earth was scorched and resembled a red-hot furnace or frying pan. Ling Gao and Li Xinshan grabbed the beautiful woman and were about to take her away with them. Before that, they killed her companion named Yang Yuan, who was the captain of a group of survivors but, like the hooligans, had no special powers or abilities. But unexpectedly, the young man was reborn and his superpowers awakened. In addition, he received a system for improving items. As he used different types of weapons and all kinds of skills, they automatically became stronger, and soon his bullets became powerful, and there were no longer any obstacles for them. But there were also traitors among the people in his life, who it would seem should be helping each other during the post-apocalypse. However, the young man had already greatly improved his skills, and therefore such an opponent, albeit primitive, was no match for him. In the end, the one who first committed treachery and betrayal was killed. Yang Yun started out as a young man with ordinary abilities. He was part of a team that included a beautiful girl named Zhao Zhan, and also the pink-haired and green-eyed, very naive and sweet, touching and defenseless Zhang Yi. So, let's move on to the story itself, the third year after the end of the world August. In one of the suburbs of Yuzhou, in a wild wasteland, the surface temperature reached 67 degrees, and only the lizards were enjoying the sun, basking in the heat. A fire monster nicknamed the Firewolf attacked a young man who, although he fought back, could not destroy the beast. Captain Yang Yuan lay in ambush, while the peaceful residents hid in a cave, hoping that their captain would defeat the enemy and kill the monster. While the young man was reloading his weapon, the Firewolf opened its huge mouth and, spraying saliva everywhere, was about to devour the hero. Two beautiful girlfriends possessing no abilities other than their natural beauty got hold of a gun somewhere and started shooting at the monster, trying to distract it from Yuan. Surprisingly, Yi even hit the Firewolf in the eye, which made the monster even more angry and aggressive. In the next moment, huge fangs and a slobbering muzzle loomed over the touching, green-eyed beauty, who realized that this was the end. But luckily, the young man managed to reload his gun and rushed into the attack, firing it and preparing his sharp blade. Yang Yin jumped directly at the Firewolf and stabbed it in the snout with his weapon. It was, one might say, a very primitive attack, because the monster simply shook its head and threw the young man far away, knocking him off his feet. The Firewolf was wounded and had no intention of attacking people yet. Jin set about bandaging the wound and stopping the bleeding, saying that they would have to leave immediately afterwards. However, Yuan gave her a counter order to take Yi and leave, and by this point, Yi was already crying bitter tears, believing that her companion was dying from his injuries. Suddenly, someone's strong, firm hand grabbed Jian by the forearm, preventing her from bandaging the wound. Len Gao said that it was not worth wasting medicine on a doomed boy, because he had been badly beaten by the Firewolf. Li Qingshan checked the supplies the boys had and said that they had almost nothing left, only a little water and food. He didn't understand why Yuan was pretending to be a saint, because since the global drought began 3 years ago, ruins had appeared. Monsters had broken out of the dungeons, and almost the entire population of the planet had already perished. It was the end of the world. The world had changed, and an ordinary person without abilities, especially one who was wounded, was now nothing more than a burden. Jen was outraged by the guy's behavior, because when Yuan saved him, he didn't think about the fact that the rest of the people had no abilities. They continued to rummage through things in search of something to steal, and looking at the gun, wondered why Captain Yuan had used it, since it was so primitive. Li was ready to accept the fact that Yuan had done everything he could to save them, and now had to die peacefully, and the girls tried to stop him. Jen struggled and did not want to leave with the boys. She was going to stay and take care of the wounded Yuan, and Yi also wanted to stay with her friend. Len Gao thought the girls were talking nonsense, because with 3 men, they would be safer. The Firewolf could return at any moment, so they had to leave, and when they reached Fan Hao's troops, perhaps some important man would take an interest in them. She continued to resist, insulting the boys and calling them a herd of cowardly animals who only thought about their own skins and were ready to betray their comrades, and the girl kicked Li in the face. Yai followed her friend's lead and sank her sharp teeth into the arm of the guy who was holding her. Li said that now he would show who was the man here, because Yuan used to protect his girlfriends. But now that he was dead, they were finally in his hands. She tried to resist, calling the man a bastard who would die in hellish torment, but the bully's hand was tightly clamped around her throat. The jerk brought his face close to hers and stuck out his tongue, saying that he would love to hear her thoughts right now. But then suddenly someone's nice red sneaker smacked Lee's head with such force that his tongue fell out and lightning flashed in his eyes. Flattened, Lee lay in a dent in the stones and couldn't understand what had happened to him. He opened his eyes slightly and saw someone's broad back and a t-shirt covered in blood. It was the captain of the survivors, Yang Yuan. But he was dead. How could this handsome man be standing here now? The guys dragged the beautiful girls behind them, trying to leave the dangerous place as quickly as possible, while the girls continued to call for their friend Yuan. Suddenly, Yuan stood before the group of fugitives, alive, healthy, and unharmed, pointing a gun at the guys and demanding that they let the girls go, or he would shoot. Lin Gao immediately left the beautiful girls and tried to calm Captain Yang Yuan, saying that it was better to continue the journey together and not spoil their relationship. Li was more determined. He did not want to engage in conversation with Yuan, not believing that the guy would dare to kill a person, and at that moment he had already picked up a sharp and heavy stone. Li Shanshan said that Yuan was the good guy of the post-apocalypse who saved everyone. So how could he now threaten his friends? And at the same time, Li crept up, raising the stone above his head to strike the captain. Shanshan was still talking about how unacceptable it was to kill a person when Yang Yuan, without turning around, shot him. The next shot hit Liang Gao in the groin as he tried to say that the captain had literally gone mad. No more words or actions were needed because the rest fled, confident that the captain and the two girls would not survive. However, Yang Yuan said that he had nothing to do with them because the old Yuan was no longer there. They had killed him. At that moment, the young man felt dizzy and completely drained of strength. The hero would have fallen backward, but Jean caught him in her arms. She had always believed that Yuan would not die. The captain replied that he was not well because he was already dead, but he had awakened and activated his abilities, thanks to which he had escaped death. The girls knew that people with abilities were heroes of the end of the world, the hope of all survivors, and now absolutely everyone, including the military from Fan Hao, would fight for the guy. The only thing that remained unclear was what this ability was, because the young man's body was literally on fire. Yun himself did not know what ability he was talking about, but then information came that his weapon had been upgraded for defeating one enemy. Yun realized that his abilities and experience were related to improving items. The purpose of this system was to strengthen the carrier by increasing the level of items, and to do this it was necessary to accumulate item experience and personal experience by using them. Use gives item experience. For a gun, this means shooting and killing. Just then a growl sounded, which usually terrified everyone. The firewolf was chasing people again, and since it was a D-class fire monster, the girls were terrified. Yang Yuan was completely calm and confident, because now he had abilities, and if he couldn't even handle a Class D firewolf, then it was unclear how he would protect the girls in the future. At that moment, the firewolf found the backpacks with provisions and literally devoured all of the young people's food. Sitting behind a rock, his former comrades watched this. They deliberately lured the firewolf with food to avenge their slain friend and buy time to find the nearest Fan Hao troops. At this time, the monster finished eating the rations and, of course, was not full, but his appetite only grew, so the firewolf went in search of new provisions. Yi and Jin were frightened by the approaching monster, huddling deep in the cave, hiding behind Yuan's back. The captain used his pistol, which was still ordinary, with effective range and normal accuracy, but often misfired. That's what happened this time. Several shots missed their target, and the firewolf attacked the group. Fortunately, at that very moment, a pistol upgrade became available. 6 shots earlier, and now 4 more shots gave 1 experience point each. Yin was very pleased with this ability because the small pistol increased his level so dramatically. The captain prepared to shoot the monster instantly, but it turned out that he was not ready for this yet because his level did not match the high level of the item. He had to get nervous and immediately increase his experience to become a suitable user of the weapon. His former comrades sat in horror behind a rock, their eyes wide, watching their captain shoot the huge firewolf with a regular pistol, and they did not understand why Yuan had become so strong. The traitors realized that they couldn't leave him like that. Otherwise, they would all die. It was very hot in the city of Wanzon. The sun was mercilessly scorching, and people were hiding in tents, trying to stay in the shade. Yang Yin also set up his tent so that he and the girls could rest. The beauties were very tired. They had spent the last 2 days on the road and had finally caught up with the nearest Fan Hao troops. Yang Yuan reasoned that the 111th Detachment, which they would soon catch up with, was certainly not at the top of the rankings. But at least there was a place to stay, and the young man wanted to gain as much experience as possible. He asked if the girls could stay here in this town because she no longer had the strength to continue on their journey. Yin explained to the beautiful woman that Fan Hao's troops were an official organization. They were obliged to accept wandering survivors without question and provide them with shelter and food. At that moment, some strangers, also refugees, approached the tent and asked if this guy had really killed the firewolf recently, and if so, they were willing to trade their valuables for some fresh meat. They immediately offered money, crackers, shoes, flasks, chargers, maps, and many other things. I recognized one of her acquaintances in the crowd. It was Yui Wei. The guy said he also wanted some meat because he was hungry and had something to offer in return. Shen was terribly indignant because this insolent man did not call Yuan the captain when he left him seriously wounded in the cave with the firewolf. Yue knelt down in front of everyone and began to apologize to the captain, saying that he was wrong and should not have listened to Liang Gao. It turned out that Liang Gao had said that they needed to find Fan Hao's troops, and then they would return for their captain. But in reality, he just wanted to abandon Captain Yuan. Only when everything was revealed did it become clear that Liang Gao had discovered the core of a high-class monster in advance, and sent his subordinates away so that he could use the core for himself. With the help of this core, he became an official, and not only did he not help his old comrades, but he also pretended not to know them at all, so Yu Wei came to beg Captain Yuan to save him. The captain immediately agreed to help his former subordinate, but Jian did not like this because the traitor should have gotten what he deserved, since he had abandoned his captain last time. Yu Wei was sure that Captain Yuan was a good man who would never hold a grudge and would save his loved ones. His words were clearly flattering. Yen came up with a way out of the situation. He said that he would now wound Wei, and then he would be able to forgive him. After that, he would definitely feed his subordinate meat, and Yu Wei couldn't believe his ears. However, he had to believe it, because the new Captain Yuan was precisely such a vindictive person and was ready to give his spoils to anyone but Yu Wei. Hearing this, the crowd of strangers immediately threw the traitor aside and rushed to Captain Yuan with a request to share the meat with them, declaring that they were ready to provide him with any assistance. Len Gao peered out from behind the tent and did not understand how Yuan had been able to get there so quickly, since he had erased all the marks left by Fan Hao's troops. Moreover, Yuan felt great and lived very well. He had meat, girlfriends, and people came to him and exchanged all kinds of goods. The next day, Yang Yuan and his friends went to the distribution center, where they received rations and documents. The military said they gave them little food because everyone knew that they had been trading meat the day before, and supplies in the unit were limited and were given first to weak people who were unable to get food for themselves. Jin was outraged by the work Yuan had been assigned. He had to dig wells and carry soil, while the assistants and ordinary people were given tasks to search for resources outside the base. The young man replied that on the contrary, there was no reason to complain, because he knew that Captain Yuan was wounded and had therefore taken special care of his health. Only reliable people could be sent out to scout and gather resources, and now was not the time to create bottlenecks. They had been given a task and needed to leave without delaying others. Yuan took his assistant by the hand and said that there was no point in arguing and proving anything. They had to go because Yi was waiting for them. The men shouted after him that Captain Yang should go hunting and searching for food himself, and when he gave up, he should be sure to give the girls to them. Jin still couldn't calm down. She was very angry about the situation and believed that it was all because of Liang Gao, who had become a petty official and was now abusing his power. Wen agreed that the other guys were acting very strangely towards them for some reason, because there was no enmity between them. Why did they start harassing them? Yuan said he would go hunting to replenish their food supplies and instructed the girls to scout the situation and find out if Liang Gao had done anything against them. Yi was tasked with preparing lunch, and she grilled wolf meat steaks. The smell was simply mind-boggling, and soon some unfamiliar guys came into their tent and demanded that the girls share the delicious food with them. Yi literally clung to the food container, unwilling to give it up. But the guys wanted to take the meat to Liang Gao to earn his favor. But the guys weren't going to ask for permission. They took the food and threw the girl on the floor. Yi screamed from the tent and called for help, But her neighbors did not come to her rescue because they were afraid that the gangsters would punish them too. One of the guys literally threw the girl to the floor and said that she could scream as much as she wanted, and they would see if her brother Yuan would come to rescue her. They didn't have to wait long, and Yuan's return was accompanied by a shot fired at the bully. Yuan stood in the doorway of the tent with a gun in his hands, his eyes filled with hatred. The guy clutching his wounded shoulder threatened that Fan Hao's troops forbade murder and that it was punishable by law here, but in response he received 2 wounds to his knee. Yang Yun said that if he wanted to kill, he would definitely kill, and the Fan Hao troops would not do anything to him. He then added that the guy should stop scaring him because he was famous as a coward and would die as a coward. Almost immediately, a notification came that the gun had been upgraded, and Yuan thanked his victim for giving him experience. Chen was returning to her tent when people rushed towards her, shouting that a murder had taken place and that Yuan had committed it. The alarmed girl ran into the tent, worried about Yuan and Yi, but they were alive, and the one who wanted to hurt little Yi was already dead. Chen was hardly surprised when she saw that the villain was Yu Wei. Yi was in tears because her brother had committed murder for her sake. It was her fault, and now he was in trouble. Chen reassured her friend, saying that these scoundrels should have been killed long ago, especially since Fan Hao's troops shoot people on the spot for stealing food. Yi calmed down a little and remembered hearing rumors in the city that Captain Yuan had previously abused his subordinates, appropriated all the supplies for himself, and even used them as bait for monsters. Jin also confirmed these rumors. Many in the detachment believed Liang Gao's stories and were now opposed to Yuan, not only refusing to work with him, but even wanting to expel him from the town. Yang Wen was shocked by this news, but remained completely calm and confident, saying that it was still unknown who would end up leaving. Just then, soldiers appeared in front of the tent and asked if Yang Yuan was there. The young man came out, not intending to hide or run away. Standing before him were members of the disciplinary committee who informed him that he had violated safety regulations. Captain Zhang ordered his subordinates to arrest Yuan. Yang Yuan did not waste time trying to figure out what was going on, but struck the soldiers with a backhand, and several of them were immediately hit in the face. Captain Zhang said that Yuan had killed a man and must be punished by the disciplinary committee. One of the soldiers advised him not to resist, otherwise the bullets would be merciless. Yin said that he had killed the villain for stealing food and attacking a girl, and that it was self-defense. However, the disciplinary committee representatives did not believe his words and demanded proof. They immediately recalled that Yuan had refused to carry out tasks that he found uninteresting and did not want to follow the rules. At that moment, Yi stepped forward and showed the visitors her abrasions, bruises, and torn clothes, saying that this was evidence of the attack. But the boys claimed that the girl was lying, that she had made it all up and simply injured herself in order to slander them. Len Gao and Yang Yuan got into an argument, making accusations against each other and recalling all the grievances they had suffered during their previous service. Captain Zhang of the disciplinary committee listened to this and decided that he did not want to hear any excuses and demanded the immediate arrest of the murderer. Yin said that he had more evidence to prove his case and was ready to present it. Len Gao thought that he had already checked everything and there were no cameras near the tent, which meant that nothing could be proven. Yen said that his meat had marks on it, so if the thieves had stolen it, they would be able to find the marked meat in their tent. They just needed to search the tent. The thieves began to shout that this was complete nonsense and that there was nothing of the sort and that it was time to stop pulling the wool over everyone's eyes. But Captain Zhang sent his subordinate to check. Soon the soldier shouted that he had found the meat and was ready to begin the inspection. Yuan warned that his girlfriend was very careful and always put marks that could only be found upon close inspection. Sure enough, each stake had a bird mark, which the captain of the disciplinary committee saw with his own eyes. The thieves began to shout that they had carved the marks themselves and that they had long had this habit developed over many years. However, Jen began to investigate why they had carved her name. Since Swallow is her name, Uncle B began to make up another excuse, but Captain Zhang was no fool. He realized he was being deceived and grabbed the liar and thief by the throat, saying that he had long been aware of all these tricks. The captain squeezed Bo's throat tightly and said that if he ever did something like this again, it would be the last thing he ever did. After that, Captain Zhang slammed the thief to the ground with all his might, took his men away, and left the tent. Ling Gao continued to say that, in any case, he was the boss in this area, and sooner or later he would catch Yuan doing something wrong. Chen was upset. She had managed to deal with the disciplinary committee and prove her case, But it was Liang Gao who assigned the tasks. Yen told the girl not to be upset, that he would act according to the circumstances, and then began to take sticks out of his bag. He explained to his companion that he wanted to make a weapon for her self-defense, because Liang Gao would come back sooner or later anyway. Yen assembled a wooden crossbow, and for this he received additional experience. Wai really liked the crossbow that her brother had made for the girls. It was really cool. The young man immediately tried it out to see how strong and effective it was. The newly created weapon completely satisfied Yuan, and he immediately strengthened its condition. After that, Yin took up the crossbow and began practicing shooting with it. The very first shot was a success. The arrow flew far and with great force. The girls thanked Yuan, and Yi said she wanted one too. Her brother promised to make them for everyone, and now he had another way to gain experience. The next day, unexpected guests arrived at the distribution point. It was Captain Ya with her friends. Yen reported that he had already completed the slaughterhouse task and demanded a new assignment. He was told that there was a new well just a kilometer from the southeast tower of the camp, and that help was needed there. But there was one but. Giant wolves lived there. She said that Captain Yuan had superpowers, and the girls weren't a burden, and the loot would be divided according to strength and participation, so no one would lose out by having them on the team. However, none of the men wanted to join their team because they were afraid of them and did not trust them. No one wanted to risk their life and go on a mission with a killer. The girls tried to prove that this was not true and that they had simply been slandered. Liang Gao, one might say, enjoyed watching what was happening. He was not opposed to giving the task to Yuan, but no one wanted to join forces with them. The next moment, Yuan jumped up to the table and slammed Liang against it with all his might, then fired a burst around his head. The guy said that he was not to be feared because he had not even killed his enemy, and that in this world power was everything. He then turned to the other hunters and declared that he had a special ability, a gun with infinite ammunition. He didn't want to tell the truth, so he simply suggested that anyone who wanted to join him should meet him at the well. The hunters gathered near the well and of course discussed Yuan. Everyone agreed that he really did have a very cool ability and that it might be worth joining forces with him. Lenga listened to these conversations and was literally furious because he had done everything he could to turn the guys against Yang Yuan. In the end, everyone moved to the excavation site a kilometer away from the southeast tower of the city. Yan was digging a well and was literally exhausted from this hard labor under the scorching sun. He was also exhausted and flushed, but she wanted to do her job honestly so that the others would see their diligence, lower their guard, and perhaps someone would agree to join them. Suddenly, the girl sensed something. Her eyes literally lit up, and she told Yuan that something seemed to be wrong there. Everyone turned their heads in the direction she pointed, trying to see what Yi had noticed. But nothing was visible yet. But then there was a loud thud, the ground shook, and a huge stone monster jumped out from behind the mountain toward the people. The stone monster was made of rock, was completely indestructible, and was enormous in size and stature. It was known that stone monsters usually lay in the sun and hardly moved, so it was strange to see this monster suddenly wake up. Yen managed to jump aside and narrowly avoided being trampled by the giant, but he realized that he needed to get his gun, drop the shovel, and defend himself. Several shots hit their target, the head of the huge stone monster. This had absolutely no effect. The monster remained intact and unharmed, only becoming even more enraged, and it became clear that ordinary bullets had no effect on it. While Yuan was figuring out how he could defeat the villain, a huge stone hand began to descend on him. The young man managed to jump out of the way, and the hand slammed down nearby, scattering fragments of stone everywhere. Yuan ordered the girls to hide. He didn't have to repeat himself twice, and the girls rushed away while Yuan fired more shots at the stone monster's body. He did this while running, trying to lure the monster away. The stone monster had another interesting feature. It could shoot its fingers, which flew at its victims like bullets. Yuan was very agile, jumping over and dodging these attacks, and at one point it seemed that the young man would not make it. The captain couldn't kill the stone monster, but he hoped to gain at least a little experience in this battle. Suddenly, he tripped over a rock and fell, dropping his gun, thinking that it would be good to improve this weapon to make it stronger. He sensed something from a distance and sent Yan to help Yuan. The girl took her crossbow and reassured her friend, saying that she would not leave her brother alone in danger. This was the perfect opportunity to use the crossbow and test it in action. She aimed at the stone monster and fired the crossbow, the arrow flying quickly and accurately. It hit the monster in the neck, which reacted sharply as if it really felt pain. The situation was very difficult because the stone monster did not take any damage at all. The crossbow was too weak against the stone monster, and the girls barely managed to hide from another hail of stones. By this point, Yang Yuan had already managed to upgrade his pistol, and he was ready to deal with the stone monster. But then another screw-up happened. The magazine jammed, and he had to quickly fix the weapon because the guy's speed was already crazy. As the character's level increased, the pistol also improved, and there was a chance to win. While Yuan was dealing with his weapon, the stone monster threw a stone lasso at Jian, and it began to pull the girl in. Yuan shot the monster's arm and managed to break the stone lasso that could have killed the girl. The guy made sure that after the upgrade, his bullets were capable of damaging the monster. Yuan ran to the rescue, firing his new weapon, and noticed that the monster's joints had become vulnerable. Of course, this was a temporary solution, and shooting the stone monster's knees only slowed it down a little. The stone monster immediately began to repair itself, so it was not worth counting on a quick and easy victory. Yin understood that this was only a temporary solution. Yi and Jin broke free from the giant and were able to take cover behind the rocks, while the stone monster continued its attack. He somehow spotted where the monster's magic core was located and passed this information on to Yuan. The captain had to shoot at the left side of the monster's chest, because that was where the core was located. After hearing such precise instructions, he took aim with both hands and fired accurately at the target. One shot was enough to hit the core and destroy the monster. It crumbled into a pile of rocks and the earth shook from its fall. Yang Yuan watched with satisfaction as his opponent was destroyed and was pleased that he had finally succeeded. After the dust settled, the young man found the red magical core of the stone monster in the pile of rocks. It was a very beautiful red core, and it was worth a lot. It could be exchanged for 3 months' worth of rations for 2 people. Jean hugged and thanked her friend, not understanding how Yi knew where the core was hidden. Could it be that she had awakened her ability? It was very pleased that she would no longer be a burden, but she did not want to take the core for herself, considering it Yuan's achievement. Leng Gao was boiling with rage. His worst enemy was still alive, the giant wolves hadn't killed him, and the stone monster hadn't been a problem either. In addition, he was enraged by the superpower that Yang Yuan had awakened in himself. The man did not hold back and took the gun along with his company. To her complete surprise and that of everyone else, Yi saw the approaching danger again. The girl rushed to Yuan just as the bullet flew towards him, and Yi managed to push the captain to the ground. Unfortunately, the bullet flew too close to the beauty and grazed her shoulder, causing blood to spurt out instantly. Jian was shocked that their friend had been wounded. Yang Yuan instantly analyzed the situation and realized that he had almost fallen victim to a sudden attack. The guy jumped up, took out his gun, and aimed it at the enemy. He saw a silhouette hiding behind one of the wooden buildings. Without thinking twice and without aiming at all, Yuan fired and proved to be more than accurate. His bullet destroyed the villain's gun, which he was holding in his hands. Yuan was genuinely surprised to see that his opponent was Liang Gao, and the villain did not understand how the captain had found him. He tried to escape, but in the next moment, a bullet pierced his leg, and the man was forced to fall. Liang Gao held his bloody leg and cried out that he didn't want to kill anyone, but only wanted to help destroy the stone monster, and had no intention of hitting Yuan and his girlfriends. The captain immediately latched on to the fact that the villain knew about the encounter with the stone monster. This meant that Liang Gao had been lying in wait for him. The next shot hit his other knee, and Liang Gao began to say that Yuan couldn't kill him. According to the law, a person with superpowers must not kill ordinary citizens. The next shot shattered his wrist. One replied that the man had attacked them first, and even if the army found out about this situation, they had nothing to fear. Besides, Yuan had no intention of killing him. Liang Gao knelt and begged for mercy, claiming that he would never dare to harm them again. Yuan approached the man, but he suddenly jumped up and stabbed the young man in the ribs with a knife he had been hiding. With the knife sticking out of his ribs, Yuan struck his opponent in the face with all his might, and Liang Gao flew into the rocks. The bloodied criminal sat near a pile of rocks. But these were not just rocks, but a stone monster that had awakened, sensing the smell of blood. In the next moment, it opened its mouth and swallowed the man, thus healing its wounds. No one mourned Liang Gao's fate. It was decided to leave before the stone monster fully recovered and turned its attention to the people. Having moved to a safe distance, the whole company began to tidy themselves up. Yuan's body was bandaged, Jin bandaged Yi's arm. He deserved to be eaten by the stone monster. In general, the company survived only thanks to Yi's ability, who now sensed the approaching danger. The girl herself did not know what superpower she had acquired, but when the criminal attacked Yuan, she felt a dark energy that immediately made her want to hide. No one knew what this ability was, but perhaps it was superhuman perception. In any case, whatever it was called, this ability now belonged to their group. But the girl could only sense anger and hatred, and only Yang Yuan acted as a real shield. She'd encouraged the little girl, saying that it was a very cool ability and very strong perception, much stronger than that of an ordinary person. Jen was very upset that she had no ability and was deeply disappointed about it. Yuan tried to calm his friend down, saying that she was skilled with a crossbow, which was also very cool, but the girl replied that a crossbow was too weak and couldn't destroy monsters. Yang Yuan thought for a moment, then asked for some blanks and said he would try to improve the beauty's weapon. The captain carved a large number of arrows, doing so in order to gain experience, but said that soon everyone would see what he had actually come up with. To improve items, you first need to increase your level, and to do that, you need to gain experience by creating items, which is exactly what the guy was doing now. It was a very effective plan, because soon the girls were amazed by the changes that had taken place in their companion. He literally became more powerful and stronger before their eyes. His physical strength and endurance seemed to have improved, and his wounds began to heal faster. After that, Yuan asked to take off the crossbow and give it to him to improve his ability. The captain noted that they had been training with the crossbow constantly, and he had already gained enough experience to improve it. After all the improvements were made, the crossbow became a very serious weapon that could deliver great range and power, and now even a stone monster was nothing to fear. Jin was very happy. She rushed to hug Yuan and said that she would never let him down. After that, the captain gave another crossbow, a simpler model, to Yi, who could now also train and gain experience. The beauty was as happy as a child, but suddenly Yi felt danger approaching again. She turned in a certain direction and told Yuan that there was something there. Yang Yuan did not wait long and expose himself to danger. He immediately fired in the indicated direction. This time, Li Shinshan was hiding in the distance with a long knife in his hands, and he immediately took a bullet to the body. Jin realized that this was a hidden possessor of supernatural powers, and Yi was frightened, because they shouldn't have gotten involved in new trouble. Yuan reassured his friends, saying that the villain had clearly crept up with the intention of attacking, and if it weren't for the warning, they would hardly be standing there alive and well now. But then a shout rang out, and an unfamiliar voice addressed the group, asking what was going on. It was a patrol that had caught them red-handed and saw the corpse lying at their feet. One immediately announced that he was the one who had fired the shot, and that the man who had been killed was a hidden possessor of supernatural powers who had wanted to attack with a knife, and therefore had to be killed. The patrol officer did not believe these words, saying that, in his opinion, Yuan had attacked the young man first. Among the patrol officers was a man in a white suit and glasses. He immediately noticed the wound left by an unusual weapon, and realized that the owner of this weapon possessed an amplifying ability. This was Commander Chen from the development department. He also realized that the girl with pink hair was able to detect hidden power users. The squad needed people like her, and there was no point in punishing them for murder. Chen immediately ordered the patrolman to release these people. In his opinion, the victim did indeed possess power, and his body language indicated that he was about to attack. The patrolman disagreed with this decision because he believed that lawbreakers should die, but he could not argue with his commander, so he suggested that everyone return to camp. After that, the soldiers left the area, instructing Yuan to dig a hole and bury the dead man, since they had shot him. Yuan examined the body, found a gun on the dead man, and realized that they had survived only thanks to Yi's abilities. The young man also decided that they needed to make protective armor, preferably an exoskeleton. Yuan handed the weapon to Jian, saying that the modern world was a dark forest and that one could not trust one's fate to other people. The girl had to learn to defend herself. The whole group spent the next hour with shovels, and finally they dug to the point where they could take a break. Yang Yan thought that digging a hole during the end of the world was too tiring, because he could use his strength to benefit people. Suddenly, a stone fortress appeared behind them, and everyone was amazed at the speed with which the military camp had been built. Jin suggested that they probably had someone with earth power, after which the girl took out steaks for the company to eat. It was a great decision. Everyone enjoyed the food, and Yuan realized that the military was planning to stay in this area, perhaps because they had discovered an underground river with sufficient water supplies. It was decided not to rush to leave this territory, which meant they needed to find a good place to stay. Yika noticed that their friend was eating almost nothing, but Jin assured her that one piece was enough for her, as she didn't like dried meat at all. Yang Yuan guessed that the girl was just saving money and said that in the future they would definitely have no problems with food, so they could relax and enjoy themselves. He also calmed down and ate the meat, because Brother Yin never lied to her. Yuan told them to take their time and eat everything, and then they would go to the military camp, as he needed to change something. But soon Yang Yuan looked very worried, as he was no longer sure that what he was looking at was really a military camp. It was truly amazing, but the next morning the camp looked even taller and more powerful. When they approached the gate, the boys were met by armed guards who did not want to answer any questions and did not let anyone inside. The guards said that this place was on the border of an arid zone, and they were planning to create a permanent safe zone. If civilians agreed to the military's terms, they could settle there, receive a salary, and live there. Yang Yuan knew that he was hiding the secret of the evolution system, so he couldn't enter the safe zone. And besides, it was unknown how long this zone would remain safe. Yen showed the guard the creature's core and said he wanted to trade with the military. The guard asked what exactly the young man wanted to exchange it for, and added that once he knew, he would order the necessary items to be delivered right here. Yen said he wanted to make a portable safe house, and the girls were stunned. They were disappointed that their friend was not going to enter the safe zone. Wai even cried, thinking that Yuan was going to abandon them. But the young man said that the current defenses were too weak, and that even in the safe zone, they needed their own house. The guard said that a safe house was expensive, and that one creature core was not enough, and it was difficult to transport. Yen replied that the core was just a deposit and that he wanted to place an order for a house, after which the guards led the guests inside. Inside, they found themselves in a workshop where various people were creating or repairing devices and gadgets, working tirelessly. The room was equipped with the latest technology, and engineers could even penetrate space. Yuan realized that this place held a huge number of military secrets. The guard bowed to the manager and said that he had brought a man who wanted to place an order. The head of the development department was Commander Chen, whom he had met the day before, and he also recognized the young man he had seen the day before. The men greeted each other. Yuan said he needed a portable bunker and asked if Chen could make one for him. The bunker had to fold into a box that could be carried around. When needed, you press a button, and the box immediately turns into a house. Chen listened to the description of the order and asked how much the young man thought such a bunker would cost. One of the engineers, overhearing their conversation, said that they were not a high-tech factory. She thought that Yuan wanted to show off his house to other people. Commander Chen told his subordinates not to be rude to customers, and after manufacturing, they would go together to test the equipment. One of the engineers undertook to show what they already had, and the man held some kind of blurry flying creature in his hands. He began to ask what size the house should be and what materials should be used in it, and based on the answers, these materials appeared in space. Yuan watched what was happening with great interest. He said that the materials should be ordinary, without armor, and the structure should be simple, so that the house could accommodate 5 people with ventilation and painted in camouflage colors. Chen listened calmly and said that such a house would indeed be expensive, costing at least 100 cores. The commander did not want to put the client in an awkward position and suggested that he stay in the safe zone instead of buying such an expensive house. The girls were also stunned to hear the huge price, because that would be enough to wake up 10 people, so maybe it would be better for them to find a cave or settle in a large hollow tree. Yen didn't listen to anyone and asked the development department commander how long it would take to complete the order. Yen gave 1 core to Chen, saying it was an advance payment and that he would bring 10 more cores in the evening, but the guy couldn't guarantee that he would get the core and asked what he could use to replace the missing cores. Chen considered this comment fair and said that they could bring 100 kilograms of monster meat in the core. After that, the commander left the laboratory, and Yuan stayed behind to fill out the paperwork and sign the purchase agreement. Yen was very pleased that he had almost succeeded in his plan, because as soon as he built himself a bunker, everyone would immediately understand how convenient it was. After finishing all the paperwork, the company went to the wild mountains to gain experience and earn the money needed to pay for the house. Yang Yan asked Yi if she could sense the presence of monsters, but it turned out that the beauty could only sense them within 100 meters. Yi was very upset that she was completely useless, But Yuan reassured her, saying that she had only just awakened and that when she improved her skills, she would become more sensitive. But suddenly Yi sensed danger approaching. She shouted to Yuan to be careful and watch out for roots and pointed in the direction. Yuan immediately began shooting in the direction his assistant had indicated. The strange, dangerous creature was not killed by the shots, but jumped to another tree. Yuan quickly jumped closer to the right spot and fired at point-blank range. It became clear that the young man had succeeded and killed something, so now they had to go and examine their prey. Jian did not understand what this thing was. It looked like an ordinary tree, and the girl was able to cut off a piece with a regular knife. Yi came to the rescue again, pointing out where to dig. Sure enough, the monster's core was soon unearthed, because plants could also turn into monsters. The core was quite large and probably compensated for some of the meat. Yen praised the beauty, who could now not only build fires and cook food, but also save lives. Yai was moved to tears by her abilities, but suddenly felt a new danger approaching once again. It was a huge, monstrous flying bird with sharp claws, 4 eyes, and a beak full of sharp teeth. Wen immediately opened fire on the approaching bird. He hit the monster in the head, and the bird began to scream piercingly, spraying saliva everywhere. Yen realized that his opponent was too fast and had to react very quickly, but his sudden movements caused his knife wound in his stomach to reopen. At that moment, the giant flying monster hovered over the people, preparing to attack them. One made a very smart decision and immediately fired 3 bullets into the bird's wing. The monster was wounded, and Yuan began to approach, intending to finish off the creature. And indeed, when the bird could no longer maneuver in the air, 1 accurate shot was enough. The girls came out from behind the trees where they had been hiding during the battle and noted how powerful the pistol had become. Yen was very pleased with his weapon. It was truly the king of pistols. Jin noticed the bleeding wound, but the young man said not to worry, they had to deal with the bird first. At that moment, they heard voices. Strangers were approaching the clearing. It turned out that these people had been tracking the bird for a long time, but it turned out that their prey had been killed by others. It was a group of survivors. Jin assumed that these strangers were going to take their prey away from them. The group came out onto the clearing and was shocked to see the dead flying monster, with its head completely severed and its wings pierced. They were happy to see such prey and hoped to soon feast on the meat of such a powerful beast. Another warrior said that such valuable items should be exchanged with the military to maximize profit. The huge survivor with beads around his neck said that if a man could kill such a ferocious eagle, he would clearly not be afraid of people like them. Hearing this, the boss named Laziness asked his comrade to shut up and not talk nonsense. Laziness understood that his subordinate was right. They would never have been able to deal with that eagle with just 1 shot. Yang Yuan asked the strangers to help him. The help consisted of carrying the bird, and in return, Yuan would give the survivors 5 kilograms of meat, which should contain a lot of energy. If eaten, it could improve their abilities. The commander of the survivors said he would only agree to 50 kilograms, but Yuan was willing to give them a maximum of 7.5. Lin asked what to do about the monsters they would encounter along the way. Yuan replied that he would take care of them, and Lin demanded 10 kilograms because there were 8 of them, and it would be impossible to divide the spoils fairly, so they agreed on that. Lin understood that there was no point in fighting such a strong enemy over meat, as they might have to cooperate in the future. So he didn't want to take any risks and introduced himself as Lin Zhong. After that, he ordered his guys to split into groups and have one stay on guard. Soon the whole company moved towards the safe zone, with the group of survivors carrying the carcass as agreed. You believed that these people could not be trusted. She saw that Lin was awakened, and Yang Yuan agreed not to get too close and to be careful. Behind this procession carrying the huge eagle, other people watched from the trees, amazed at how monstrously huge the bird was. Yang Yuan sensed the presence of some enemies and managed to get his gun, preparing for an attack. Lazy thought about how no one had ever dared to take his prey before. Suddenly, a group of people blocked their path and ordered them to leave the bird and go away. Lin was clearly either cowardly or overly cautious, as he immediately ordered his men to leave the carcass and retreat to a safe place. Suddenly, there was a powerful explosion, and the strange group that had just threatened them was blown into the air. Yang Yin raised his gun and said that if anyone else moved in his direction, the next shot would be fatal. But for now, he had simply damaged the ground beneath his opponent's feet. Lin was amazed by the strength and power of this guy. He guessed that Yuan had the ability to increase the power of his weapon. The guys looked at the gun with fear and respect. realizing that all the power depended on it. The strangers, of course, backed off, although they continued to say that they were not afraid of Yuan. Suddenly, the ground beneath everyone's feet shook, and it seemed as if an earthquake had begun. Yuan addressed his opponents once more, saying that they should not force him to use his weapons. At that moment, the ground seemed to open up, and a group of men jumped out from inside. Everyone scattered, but the warrior with the beads couldn't take his eyes off the gun and hoped to take it from Yuan to become the commander of the squad. Perhaps that would have happened if the beaded warrior hadn't fallen victim to a huge monster that burst out of the ground. The bandits who wanted to take the bird thought that the strangers knew how to summon such powerful monsters and decided to flee. However, Yuan did not move a step and shot at the target, the bullet flying, illuminating everything around. The young man was very confident, holding the gun at arm's length and asking who among those present was now afraid. But at that moment, a red-haired, long-haired girl stole the monster's core, cutting it out of the destroyed worm's body, and ran away. Everyone was amazed by the girl's audacity, and even the villains themselves rushed to catch up with her. Soon, a procession entered the safe zone, carrying a huge, monstrous eagle on their hands. Yanwen informed the military that he had brought the rest for his house and pointed to the huge carcass. The giant eagle was accepted according to the inventory. The feathers and bones were taken, everything was counted and converted into the number of shells, and it turned out that this was almost enough to cover the entire order. Jin was amazed that they had been able to earn so much, but Yuan did not understand why the girl was so surprised. Lin watched what was happening and thought about how cool it would be to have such a monster for himself. Lin confirmed once again that he would take 10 kilograms of meat because the most important thing was to solve the food problem. Gwen asked the soldiers to cut 15 kilograms of meat from different parts, and he was ready to take the rest in chunks. Soon the entire order was completed and the payment was made. Lin and Yuan settled the bill and were satisfied with the cooperation, hoping to see each other again and be of use to each other. Yuan, however, believed that in the future, he would have to work with a large number of people. After that, everyone moved to the mechanical assembly workshop. Yen turned to the head of the development department and asked if he had finished building the portable house. The manager asked for a couple more hours, but promised to finish before dark and inquired if any additional options needed to be added. Yen showed his scraped hands and said he needed full coverage armor with a power plant and, preferably, weapons. The head of the development department demanded 1,000,000 cores, but the young man said that he would manage on his own and create something more interesting than what they could offer him here. That settled it, and the engineers continued to work on creating power armor, which was still far from ideal. Commander Chen admitted that in terms of power, they lacked the energy to operate heavy armor quickly. He showed the latest version, which weighed about a ton and was 2.5 meters tall. This was the minimum weight while maintaining protection and impact resistance. The design looked terrifyingly powerful. Yin asked if it was possible to reduce the weight by using conventional materials. Chen believed that if the protective modules were removed, as in a safe house, and replaced with cheap materials, several kilograms could be shed. But in this form, the suit would only be able to run, and its speed would decrease. Even with a large amount of money, nothing would come of it. But if the weapons were removed and only the body was left, then for 1,000 cores, Shadow was ready to assemble such protection. Yanwen understood that this was too expensive and thought about what could replace the armor. The main thing was that the suit worked and looked like armor, and its performance was not important. The engineers understood that the customer is always right, and if the guy wanted such a toy, they would do everything as long as he paid for it. On the other hand, they could not guarantee that such weak armor would not break after a while. The engineers even suspected that Yuan wanted to steal their technology. He said that he was studying to be a car mechanic and planned to rebuild the car, so he would try to make the armor himself. The engineers laughed at him, saying that such a thing was clearly beyond his capabilities, especially since he was studying to be a car mechanic. He knew nothing about such complex characteristics and didn't understand them. Yuan, juggling the cores he now had enough of, set aside a certain amount and gave them to his girlfriend so they could visit the baths and buy themselves a couple of outfits. Chen really didn't want to spend these cores, believing that it was better to use them to fulfill the order. Otherwise, Yuan would be upset, and the protective suit was necessary for survival in difficult battles. But the young man reassured the beauties, telling them not to worry, that he knew what he was doing, and went with Commander Chen to the laboratory. In the laboratory, the young man was asked to stand on a platform so that his physical data could be scanned. Each protective suit was made according to individual parameters, and for this it was necessary to collect complete information about the customer. Within a few hours, the protective suit was almost ready. Chen said that there was nothing complicated about it because only Yuan's appearance was important. Suddenly, Yuan asked the lab director for permission to assemble the suit from the parts himself. He understood that otherwise he would not be able to disassemble and reassemble it, and he was ready to learn. This sounded suspicious, and Chen thought that the young man really wanted to steal their technology. But the scientists understood that he would not be able to recreate it anywhere else. So they took payment for the training in the form of nuclei and began to show him the process of assembling the protective suit. The girls had a truly heavenly day. They were finally able to wash themselves. For a long time, showers had been unavailable, and they could only wipe themselves down with a damp cloth. She remained sad. She was worried that Yuan was buying an expensive toy, that other men might laugh at him, and that there would be financial difficulties because Yuan was very generous and wasteful. Yash didn't see a problem with this. The main thing was that Yuan was happy, and the two of them would protect their patron by helping to track down monsters. But the girls were still literally covered in soap when there was a knock at the door, and Yuan shouted that the power suit was ready and they needed to hurry back. The beauties, lively in spirit and body, came confident that they could protect their friend. A huge device stood before them. Yen looked like a robot in the suit. His head, shoulders, and legs were protected, only his torso remained exposed. The suit had a turbo mode that allowed it to take off and move through the air, but it took some training to use it, and in the next moment, Yuan fell, scattering the suit into pieces. It turned out that he had damaged the ventilation system, and now he was running out of oxygen. Chen was immediately ready to fix the situation. The engineers mocked the customer. He had a lot of money, but he didn't understand that a plastic suit would break and that it was just a toy. Yi was very angry, but Yen calmed her down, saying that the engineers were right. The guy understood that his protective suit really did look like a toy and that something needed to be done about it. But he was gaining experience, and it was easier to work with than a gun. The head of the development department said that this suit was still an unusual toy and inserted an energy converter into it. The converter had to be replaced every day with a regular core. It consumed a lot of energy, but that didn't bother Yuan, who was satisfied. At that moment, one of the soldiers standing in a special place raised his hands and began to jump happily. His superpower had awakened, and his comrades suggested celebrating it. Yuan asked one of the soldiers what this place was. He was told that for 10 cores per person, one could awaken a few % of their superpowers here. The young man immediately handed over the requested amount of cores and held them out to the man in his armored hand. Later, Yuan turned to Jian, who was watching the proceedings with interest. The guy said that there should be no ordinary people on the team, and if the beauty was useless, he would throw her out at any moment. Of course, it was a joke, but there is some truth in every joke. Jean immediately agreed to the awakening procedure because she was worried about her lack of superpowers, even though Yuan would have died long ago without her help. The girl sat down in a specific place, and above her were frames made of special materials. The awakening process was usually very painful. The soldier explained that the pain was within normal limits, but if the beauty couldn't take it, she would have to pay again. Jing was confident and believed that she would endure it and not let Yuan spend so much money again, but the pain turned out to be hellish. Waves passed through the girl's body and destroyed not only her clothes, it seemed that she would not be able to withstand such stress. When the awakening process was complete, Yuan picked up his girlfriend's lifeless body in his arms. Soon the girl came to, although she looked exhausted, and the first thing she did was ask Yuan to remove the armor from his belt. Yuan did not argue, although he did not understand why she needed it, but the beauty put her hand on the bandages covering the wound. It turned out that the wound on Yuan's body had healed instantly. This meant that one of John's abilities was healing. In addition to healing, the girl had acquired the ability of 10 flaws. Now she could restore what was lost, whether living or dead. She could also turn the perfect into the defective, but her power was still limited. She was unable to heal serious wounds, and if she turned something into a defect, she could not destroy the target. Yuan asked the military if the sanctuary could detect the already awakened power. He was told that it was only possible for one core, provided that the person was already awakened. Yen suggested that Yi go and try it, since they had long wanted to know what her ability was called. The girl gladly seized this opportunity. When the process was over, her friends rushed to the beauty with interest, but she could not answer them. In reality, it turned out to be much more mundane. Yi simply could not read, the girl was still young, and had not attended school, which had ceased to exist after the apocalypse. Next, Yuan himself went to test his abilities. He hoped that his ability would be identified as a talent for improvement. That would have suited him perfectly. The process of discovering Yuan's abilities was also very painful. The guy literally flew out of the device to his friends, who were eagerly awaiting his return. Yuan flew out excited and elated and fell on Jian with all his might. It was clear that the procedure had affected him. When he came to his senses, the young man said that he had not been given a name either, only that it was a concept. No other information was available. Jian's abilities were of the rules type, but it was still unclear what exactly Yi had. By this time, the little girl had already drawn what she had seen and was ready to show her friends. It turned out that the girl had completely restored the entire text with her wand. She had a literally photographic memory. After studying what she had written, it became clear that Yi could detect any action that caused harm, as well as sense evil intent and threats. It was amazing. Yuan reassured the girl, saying that she was very strong and unique. Yi lost her parents when she was very young and ended up in this terrible world. She awakened her abilities but did not develop them, preferring to remain safe. The awakening of such an ability was a consequence of living in the world of the apocalypse. Jin realized that her friend's abilities were the same as hers. Even though Yi didn't attack, she was very important for defense. Having finished with the attraction of awakening their abilities, the company set off to pick up the portable house before it got dark. An announcement came over the loudspeaker in the safe zone. Those who had not entered the safe zone must leave, or they would be expelled. People were frightened and did not know where to go. Some residents are unhappy that the military's announcements prevent them from sleeping and resting peacefully. Together with his friends, Yuan finally left the laboratory and went with a suitcase in his hands to look for a place to set up a safe home. Once on the street, Yuan attracted people's attention. There were not only strangers, but also familiar faces. Lin, the commander of the survivor squad, offered Yuan to join them, since apparently the guy had not entered the safe zone. But the young man thanked him for the invitation and declined. Many people did not trust the safe zone, and he needed to find a secluded place for his home. Yi saw a suitable tree near which it would be good to build a house, and the others agreed that the place was indeed suitable. Yen put the suitcase on the ground, and the girls eagerly awaited the appearance of the house. He pressed a button on the suitcase, and a real miracle happened. Instead of the suitcase, there was a basic modular house in front of them, which they could improve later. Yuan immediately set about enhancing the house's features to make it more comfortable for them to live in. The girls roasted meat over a fire, watching as Yuan tried to change things with his experience. After a while, the commander proudly announced that the house was finished, although it looked, of course, like a public toilet. The girls were delighted, especially Yi, for whom it was the first house she had ever seen. Yuan explained that the material was lightweight, safe plastic. It only protected against bullets from a pistol. There was a solar panel on the roof and 3 small rooms with lighting inside. It all looked simple but very nice. Jean hadn't slept in a house for more than 3 years and was satisfied, while Yi was simply happy. The notice said that this house was very good for protection from wind and rain, but should not be relied upon for security. Yuan immediately decided to improve the dwelling. Yi liked the house so much that she began to treat it with care and no longer went to bed in dirty clothes. Wen managed to rush out of the house before the girls started changing and said that he would stand guard that night because it was time for the girls to rest. While Yuan was outside, he learned that his exoskeleton could be improved, and the captain immediately set about making these improvements. The young man learned that one of the options he had was a built-in radar system. He tested it right away and found that he could see absolutely everyone in the vicinity. Now he could scan the sky and the ground, reading data like an external brain. It was a very useful feature. Suddenly, something caught his attention, but by the time he looked closely, it had already disappeared. It was very strange, some kind of night monster or small whirlwind. The military personnel in the observation room received the image taken from the balloon and were now studying it. It was some kind of huge and strange monster, breathing fire. The old general, one of the first to face the consequences of the end of the world, realized that the ghosts were back. Lieutenant Colonel Tien said that the creatures were continuing to move in their direction, Some female mutants were already nearby and showing signs of mutation. The base major, named Joe, was really scared. He said it was getting dangerous and it might be better to leave the base. The base commander replied that this was only the beginning. There was no need to rush to flee. People needed to be given a rest. But of course, it was worth preparing. From now on, they needed to collect all the homemade coolers. They couldn't allow the water in the underground river to continue evaporating. The next morning came, and the whole company had slept well, especially the girls who had been longing for a normal life. Yin received a notification that he had gained enough experience to improve the safety of the house. He was happy and announced that it was time to get ready. Yun said that he had just seen a rich rice harvest in his dream, so he was in a great mood. But in reality, he immediately set about improving the house. Right before their eyes, their dwelling became more beautiful and stronger. In addition, there was more space in it. The house also looked different from the outside and no longer resembled a public toilet. Yin learned that the portable solar shelter could be further reinforced, and he made the house safer. Yi noticed that the weather had become even hotter, and even the day before, the temperature had not been so high. Yuan checked the readings and confirmed that it was indeed getting hotter, which meant that they would soon have to leave this place. There was still time, but they needed to start preparing to move to the next safe zone, and in the meantime, buy the necessary items. When everything had been bought and stored in the house, Yuan called the girls and said that he was about to perform a miracle. The guy pressed the red button on the wall of the house, and the structure began to fold up. It looked mesmerizing. A few seconds later, instead of a house, there was a small suitcase in front of his friends. The girls were delighted and immediately confirmed that Yuan was the coolest guy ever. In addition, the house became much lighter. Jian was delighted. It looked like a scene from a science fiction movie. She fell asleep, woke up, and everything had changed. Yen said that first they would go shopping, and then he would tell them everything. The guy suggested splitting up to save time and not follow each other around the market. There were a lot of people in the center of the safe zone today. The military offered to assemble a cooler, and new products became relevant. Now food was being exchanged for a glass of water or portable coolers. The approaching heat was affecting everyone. Yuan barely managed to get through to buy everything he needed. The excitement was crazy, with people pushing each other in the queues. The military gave Yuan a box of parts and told him that each part had a serial number that would allow him to assemble the cooler. Each assembled device would cool the underground river, preventing it from evaporating. People's lives depended on it. It seemed that the army suspected something. If instead of digging wells and destroying monsters, they were now being given the task of assembling coolers, something was clearly wrong. But there was a whole day of work ahead, and Yuan would have time to figure things out later. The guy was currently at level 4. If he could raise it a few more levels, his safety and power armor would improve significantly, he thought as he assembled the cooler. Very quickly, one device was ready, and Yuan immediately gained experience. He realized that this way he could improve his performance and enthusiastically set to work. Soon all the details were gathered, and the guy felt tired, which was understandable. The experience gained was immediately used to level up, and Yuan immediately continued his work. The guy thought he would now reach the maximum, but it turned out to be not so easy. Disappointment was reflected on Yuan's face when he learned that he had only advanced 3 levels. He wanted more. In anger, he hit the tree under which he was sitting, and something amazing happened. The tree broke from the light blow. It turned out that Yuan's strength had become very powerful. This was the effect of the level increase. Just then, his girlfriends returned from shopping and approached him. He was clutching bottles of clean water, and Jin was carrying bags of groceries and everything else they needed. Yun noted that his dynamic vision and reaction time had also improved. Now he was not afraid of either close or long-range combat. He boasted that they had bought a lot of water and received a cooler as a gift. Jin reported that she had managed to buy 2 boxes of ammunition. Yun asked Jin to give him the gun. He wanted to fix it. The young man increased the pistol's effectiveness so that his girlfriend could better protect herself. He did the same with Yi's crossbow. The girl had trained hard, and now Yuan easily enhanced the crossbow's capabilities. Suddenly, an announcement came over the internal communication system. The military reported that they would be moving out in an hour because the monsters were nearby and were preparing for a campaign. The military said they couldn't take care of everyone. Those who didn't manage to get ready would be left on their own. Another wave of panic swept through the city. People scattered to the corners, grabbing their belongings, afraid of being left alone against the monsters. Yuan summed up that everything necessary had been purchased and they could go. The military detachment would catch up with them in time. Soon, the whole company set off for their destination. The girls carried backpacks and Yuan carried a portable house. The guy noticed that the military was fussing around more than necessary, probably dismantling the cannon. It turned out that the military was preparing to fire. The monsters were approaching very quickly, and they had to be prevented from breaking through the city walls. In the next moment, a shot rang out, and a huge hairy monster was shot and fell right at Yuan's feet. It was a monstrous wolf with a huge mouth and sharp fangs. A wave of wild beasts was approaching. Panic broke out at the command observation post. The soldiers gathered at the front and watched in horror as the monsters approached. The lieutenant colonel reported to the base commander that the situation was dire. The evacuation had not yet begun, and the wave of beasts was already here. Major Joe understood that chaos would soon ensue. Ordinary people simply would not have time to leave the area. The base commander suggested using the water that had been pumped out of the underground river the day before. Of course, this was a last resort, but the time had come, and all available means had to be used. The pack of monstrous predatory wolves was huge. The military fired at the mutants from the wall, who were trying to break into the city in huge numbers. Soon, the military admitted that the safe zone was under attack. People with supplies were offered evacuation while the army covered them. Those survivors who had not entered the safe zone the day before were now not allowed inside. People were left to fend for themselves and were destined to fall prey to the predatory monsters. The major believed that the army was only responsible for those who had entered the safe zone. Those who had not made that decision had to defend themselves. Base Commander Feng had a different opinion. These were unusual people with special abilities, and they needed to be united so that their abilities could be used in the future. He ordered the artillery to be brought in to force the wave of beasts to change course, and also gave orders to members of the army with abilities to go into battle and defend the city walls. The order was carried out perfectly. The wave of monsters was knocked down by cannon fire, and Commander Feng shouted at the people to run while the road was cleared. The city gates opened, but people were afraid to leave. Everything around was littered with the bodies of slain monsters. The stupor passed, and people rushed to flee, realizing that the threat was close and a new wave of mutants would soon appear. He thought that the beasts were afraid of something. The temperature was constantly rising, which meant that danger was very close. Yuan also assessed the situation as difficult. Suddenly, Yi sensed something and froze for a few seconds. She shouted to Yuan to be careful. A wolf was approaching from behind. It was a two-headed ghost wolf with a high danger level, and there were several of them. Yuan quickly assessed the danger and fired at 3 different locations simultaneously. All targets were hit. The people nearby were amazed by such skill. They couldn't understand who had done it, a human or a monster, and looked at Yuan with apprehension. Yuan explained that he was able to detect the targets quickly thanks to the radar in his armor, which detected enemies within a radius of 100 meters. Suddenly, little Yi jumped on Yuan's head, shouting that there were many monsters underground. And indeed, a huge worm with a round, toothy mouth suddenly jumped out from under the ground. Such monsters began to appear in different places. It became clear that the underground monsters, which had been sleeping in the ground for a long time, were leaving their refuge. Yen shot one of the worms that was trying to drag a man underground, saving him. But it was useless to fight back. They had to leave the area quickly. The ground began to crack right before their eyes. The cracks were gigantic. Yi was very frightened. Yuan guessed that something terrible was happening underground. He managed to grab his friends and activate turbo mode, flying upward just as a huge monster poked its head out of the ground. Hovering in the air, Yuan shot at the enemy, and 3 huge holes immediately appeared in its head. A huge cannonball fell out of the monster. Yi had never seen such large cannonballs before. Before the girl could pick up the core, a long-haired, red-haired thief grabbed it, intending to steal the treasure. The girl would have succeeded if one of the men hadn't slammed into her with his body, stopping the thief. It turned out that these guys were working with Yuan. He killed the underground monsters, and they lured them out. Yen gladly accepted the offer. He was always ready to gain experience. Yi got her stone and was happy. Things went very well. The guys from the survivor squad provoked the underground monsters, and the earth literally boiled. Yen fired his powerful pistols at tremendous speed, instantly destroying his victims and gaining experience points. He was admired by everyone, but Yi put her hand on the ground and felt that there were a lot of monsters. Perhaps it was a nest of underground monsters. Yuan realized that even he couldn't handle it, and ordered the girls to take the cores and leave the area immediately. Thanks to his latest experience with the pistol, his abilities had increased again, and with them, Yuan's status. He was becoming invincible. Yuan shot at the monsters and obtained important and powerful cores. The members of the survivor squad admired his abilities. He fired at the ground around the thief and sternly ordered her not to touch her friends. The destructive effect was strong and unexpected. After that, Yuan said goodbye to the fighters. They thanked him for his help and took the thief with them. Yuan gave the team the cores they were entitled to. The survivors introduced themselves. There were 3 of them. They liked everything, and they hoped to work together in the future. She said they needed to continue on their way. The weather was getting hotter, and they needed to leave this place as soon as possible. Yi, who was carrying the javelins at that moment, couldn't stand the heat and fell to the ground, scattering her earnings around her. Jin was concerned about her friend's physical condition and offered her water, seeing that she was dehydrated. Yen suggested not opening the water bag now, otherwise it would simply evaporate. Yi said she would rest a little and feel better. Jen didn't like this. If this continued, they could die of dehydration. She put the cooler in the water bag. It was supposed to lower the temperature and prevent evaporation. Yen became interested and began to find out how the girl was using the cooler. The guy checked the device and noticed that it didn't heat up at all, probably thanks to the cooler. With his experience, Yuan decided to improve its capabilities. Now the device was more powerful, and it was possible to regulate the temperature of the water and air. After tinkering with the improvements a bit, Yuan managed to make the cooler cool the air around it, making it easier for the girls to breathe. After refining the cooler, Yuan created a cool dome that contained him, his house, and his friends. The girls came to their senses, sitting in a comfortable temperature, watching frightened people run past from the safe zone. The people looked frightened. It was clear that they were not waiting for help from the military and were fleeing as best they could. Their speed was high. Yen assumed it was due to the fog. He didn't know whose superpower it was, military technology or something supernatural. Jin thought it would be nice to have such an ability and increase their speed of movement. The girl touched the protective temperature shield with her finger, and fire pierced her hand. It was unbelievable. She was burned, which meant that the temperature outside had risen above 70 degrees. Panic ensued. People realized they would not make it to the safe zone. It was getting hotter, and soon everyone could die of dehydration. People ran away in panic, confident that the military would save them, although so far it looked quite different. I announced that I was literally freezing because the temperature inside the dome was quite low. It was very hot outside, and it was unclear what to do next. They couldn't stay near the cooler all the time. Jen was pensive, looking at the cooler and trying to come up with the best solution. Suddenly, an idea came to her. Water vapor was coming from the condensation. It could be used to collect water. The girl had once seen a survival show where smooth metal objects collected condensation. She'd said that first she needed to carve out a depression and make the surface smooth. The cooler would then be placed inside this hollow to collect moisture from the air. A truly brilliant idea. In the evening, Yi was sitting by the fire when Yuan returned with a huge armful of brushwood. He said it was not for the fire, but for making a bow. The bow was not for weapons, but simply for training his hands. The cooling system had reached level 7, and the gun was also good, but it was still limited by human ability, so Yuan decided to improve himself. The safe zone was bustling with the usual hustle and bustle. Some were happy with the security, while others felt they had no choice but to obey the rules. Suddenly, one of the girls living in the safe zone, carrying a box of rations, fell right on the street. The girl had heat stroke, a consequence of high temperatures, although there could have been other reasons. It turned out that she had a fever, possibly caused by a virus or illness. People urgently called the medical unit. A group of doctors arrived immediately. Strange, because they had never been interested in the health of ordinary people before, but perhaps now they were more concerned about safety. The girl was placed on a stretcher, connected to a ventilator, and taken away in an unknown direction. It turned out that recently, a rise in temperature had resulted in either a successful awakening or the disappearance of the person. The body was carried away under the cover of weapons. Suddenly, the woman on the stretcher began to turn into a monster, and the military opened fire on her, making no attempt to hide it from other people and without fear of causing panic. The old man understood. The situation was dangerous. The woman had been infected and possessed the technique of the element of fire. Despite the soldier's fire, she transformed into a monstrous creature. Yuan heard automatic gunfire and became alarmed. Something had happened in the safety zone. The guy was still carving parts for the bow when Joan called him. The girl said that their plan would have to be changed due to the changed circumstances. The temperature of the cooler was not low enough, the water droplets did not condense, so the method of obtaining water was not suitable. To achieve a lower temperature, they needed a powerful cooler or a water well. Yen scooped up some soil and stones and was able to squeeze them easily, which meant that there were no aquifers and a well would not work. Jen and Yi were alarmed and did not know what to do. Yen told them to wait. Once he had killed all the vermin, they could drink as much as they wanted. While the girls gathered materials for bows and arrows, he would improve his skills, and at dawn, they would head for the safe zone. They couldn't just run away. They needed to strengthen their forces. The girls were curious why they were going to the safe zone. It turned out that Yuan wanted to buy a plane. With his abilities, he will improve the plane to deal with monsters, the usual boyhood dreams. Jin checked Yuan for a fever, since he was talking such nonsense. He didn't have a fever. Yuan was confident that his abilities would guarantee the plan's success. That meant they could drink as much as they wanted. Jen was skeptical. If an airplane could defeat monsters so easily, the military would have built one long ago. But Yi believed in Yuan. Yuan asked the girls to trust him. Thanks to the cooler, they would not die from overheating. His friends went to gather materials while Yuan continued to cut out the parts. He had never encountered monsters before, but they say they emit light and heat. An ordinary person nearby would turn to ash. Moreover, there was apparently more than one monster. People can turn into monsters for unknown reasons. Their temperature rises. To stop the end of the world, these monsters must be destroyed. Yan looked up at the sky. Even without a plane, the monsters must be killed urgently. Otherwise, the temperature will continue to rise. His gaze fell on the combat exoskeleton. Perhaps it was time to upgrade it. Wen climbed into the exoskeleton and began the leveling process. The next level up was powerful, making him practically invincible. The young man was pleased. His armor was stronger, and his speed and agility had increased. His defensive ability allowed him to withstand sniper bullets. The detection range expanded, and the data became more detailed. For example, Yuan could now recognize a regular rat, determine its weight, length, and distance to it. Such abilities were useful. Yuan could protect himself and others faster and more effectively. The energy in the exoskeleton became more powerful, and the guy could move quickly. In literally one leap, the young man jumped a great distance. Wen noted that the light-frequency motor impulse worked very quickly. The guidance device was quite accurate, so the rat he had spotted earlier was caught off guard. Standing inside the pit he had created, Yuan noted that the speed and power had become formidable. Now it was real mobile armor. Yuan praised himself. Now it was much easier to be in the suit. But then something went wrong. Most likely the indicator broke, and his fingers began to transform before his very eyes. At first, Yuan didn't understand whether this was good or bad, but now his hands were very mobile, like a human's. The young man realized that the armor had learned to compress and fold. It was convenient. Now he didn't have to run with a load. Wen stretched his arms along his body and flew like an arrow shot from a huge bow. He landed near his house, thinking that the cannonball was almost gone and needed to be replaced with a new one. It would be easier to fight without the enormous weight. Wen pulled the core out of his belt and looked at it closely. It turned out that the energy had not decreased, but only increased. It was amazing. As his personal level increased, the core also improved, which meant there was no need to worry about energy problems. By this time, the girls who had gone out to gather materials had returned. Jen reported that the safe zone had moved further away again. It was strange. The people seemed to have settled in, but suddenly they gathered their things and left. Yi said she had a bad feeling. A new wave of beasts was probably approaching, and it would be better for them to move on. Yen listened to his friend and suggested following the safe zone. If they followed it, they would be safe. It took a couple of minutes to pack up the house and their belongings, and the group rushed to catch up with the safe zone. The fog around the zone gave them extra speed. Thinking about the fog, Yuan figured that maybe he should get some of that fog for himself. The group moved fairly quickly, with no one hindering their progress. Jin noted that after the activity, her energy had increased, and it had become easier to carry the load. Yen wanted to help the girls with their backpacks, but they asked him not to worry about them. They walked along a path trodden by some kind of detachment. Yuan considered it relatively safe. There should be no major traps. Soon they came out onto a clearing, and what they saw literally shocked them. It was littered with the bodies of dead people. It was a battlefield. Yuan noticed that someone had collected the weapons from the bodies. Yi believed that these people had encountered powerful monsters on their way. Yuan wanted to reach the safe zone as soon as possible, and now it was easier. The people had to slow down because of the battle. The silhouettes of people appeared ahead. It became clear that they were on the right track. Yin suggested not getting too close. The military might mistake them for enemies and open fire. Thanks to the fog that enveloped the people, they sped up and quickly climbed the hill. He did not understand how this was possible. People from the safe zone had not rested for a day and did not even stop. Yin thought that next time he would buy a means of transportation that would help him cross impassable mountains and wastelands. Jen also believed that people could walk faster and easier thanks to the fog. Yen understood that they needed to leave the area as soon as possible. As soon as the monster appeared, everything around them would be infected. They were in the epicenter of the infection. She suddenly felt ill from the constant use of the cooler. She hadn't noticed her body temperature rising. She couldn't take it anymore and fell backward. Yuan helped his friend up, and they continued on their way. Almost exhausted from overheating, the guys managed to catch up with the main group. Yuan understood that they couldn't go on like this. It was hard even for the men, let alone the girls. In the crowd, he met Lin, who was also catching up with the main group with his friends. He suggested that Yuan join them. One of the girls said that they didn't need dogs and shouldn't take them into the team. Yin thanked Lin for the offer but declined, showing off his powerful magic stone. Activating the stone, the young man picked up his friends on his shoulders and carried them away, surprising everyone present. After that, Yuan used the exoskeleton. This allowed him to run at a decent speed. The dynamic armor was updated, and the girls became light for him. As he ran, Yuan noticed that the situation had become more serious. There was an explosion nearby. Perhaps something catastrophic had happened. At that moment, the sky was filled with military flying saucers. The monsters reached this area and began to actively catch up with the people. The scale of the disaster increased. The military opened fire on the monsters from their flying saucers. Yuan activated his dynamic armor and, covering his friends with his body, rushed to flee with them. The young man understood that if things continued like this, they would be overwhelmed by either the monsters or the military, so they needed to flee immediately. It was an excellent decision because Yuan was looking at the sky behind him. This monster was so huge and fast that it managed to grab the flying saucer with both hands and devour it. When ordered the girls to drop their backpacks with supplies, it was a matter of life and death, and they had to run very fast. Yen turned around and realized that it was too late to run. He ordered the girls to lie flat on the ground and covered them himself, just as the flying saucer swept over them. The fog and smoke cleared, and a huge monster resembling an octopus appeared before the group. However, the army was right there, and soldiers with special abilities were ready to protect the people. They dealt with the monsters perfectly, killing and cutting them down. Yuan and the girls were practically safe. Such was the power of the army. Soon the monsters were finished off, and the soldiers began to dispose of their meat and collect the waste. They analyzed the remains and took everything that could be useful for the further survival of the people. At this time, Yuan watched the flying saucers, which he liked very much, and noted that they could carry out various orders. But there was no time to examine everything. The safe zone was moving further away, and people immediately rushed after it, trying to stay close to the military. Yes noticed that several flying saucers remained in the mountains and did not return to the safe zone. Thanks to her abilities, Yi reported that there were 8 of them. The girl's photographic memory worked perfectly. Yin examined the remains of the flying saucers and realized that they were just junk, which is why the army had not called them back. However, the young man did not lose hope and continued his search. Perhaps he would be able to find an intact saucer. A thief named San told her friend that Yuan was a real pervert, searching for useless things. Chen didn't think so. The flying saucer could reach the speed of sound and also had high penetrating power. But most likely it was a useless pursuit because the saucers were damaged, and even the army couldn't call them back. Although it would be possible to exchange parts for supplies from the military. The group decided not to interfere in other people's affairs and to move closer to the main flow of people. Finally, Yuan Yu thought he had found something, and he began to pull a huge piece of the flying saucer out from under the rubble. He couldn't do it alone, so his friends joined in, and together they pulled the saucer out. It was very large and almost intact. Most likely it did not return to base because it was crushed by rocks. Yen was amazed by the technology. He couldn't understand how such a large thing could fly. He didn't know if it would be possible to repair this high-tech device, but Jian said that if he wanted, she would help him assemble a whole plate. The girl really did have the ability to understand how devices worked. Yen was very happy and suggested that his friend try her skills. Jen sat down next to the device, placed her hands on it, and began to scan it as if treating a living person. The girl immediately felt and realized what parts and in what order needed to be used to assemble the aircraft. This process took a lot of effort for Jian, as her personal level was still quite low. Yen suggested that the girl take a break, but she refused, saying that otherwise everything would be in vain and she would have to start over. Some time passed and now a complete flying saucer was hovering in the air. Yen Yuan rejoiced at their success, but Jan's physical condition was very poor. The young man picked up the beauty in his arms. She was about to lose consciousness. The portable house was activated immediately. Yuan brought Jian into the room, thinking that she definitely needed to rest and then eat well, but rest first. Leaving Jian to sleep, Yen and Yi went outside to practice with the flying saucer. Yen warned that he wanted to take it apart to understand how the device worked and make improvements. He asked the girl to use her gift and memorize the disassembly process. Yen did not turn on the light so as not to attract monsters and began to use the scanning function. Soon the scan was complete, and the young man had all the information he needed about the number of parts and the individual components that needed to be created first. The scanning function was very relevant and useful. Now even the loss of a single screw was not a problem. Yen asked Yi if she sensed any danger and if there was a self-destruct device in the flying saucer. The girl lay down on the saucer, placed her hands on it, and after feeling it, said that the saucer was completely safe. Hearing this, Wen immediately began to disassemble it using a regular screwdriver. Soon his sensor reported that it had detected a Bluetooth signal and asked if he wanted to connect to it. The young man immediately agreed and noted that Jian had not only completely restored the plate to its factory settings, but had also reset the password. The young man was amazed at how long and funny the password the army had come up with was. You had to enter your ID number backwards twice and add a couple more numbers. After successfully entering the password, the functions of launching and controlling the saucer, checking ammunition, self-destruction, as well as viewing the saucer from cameras and radar topography became available. Yen was right in assuming that the saucer had a self-preservation function. It was good that the monsters had not damaged this wonderful flying machine. It was a real treasure. The boy told his girlfriend that now they had a flying saucer and no monsters could scare them anymore. Yi was thrilled. She wanted to see how the saucer would fly and begged Yuan to do it. The young man activated the neural control and started the engine. The saucer rose into the air completely silently, which also amazed the girl. He knew that this device had no propellers or external engine. It was either anti-gravity or some kind of dark magic. The saucer rose high into the sky at a crazy speed. Due to the high speed, a sound wave appeared that could attract monsters, so it was better not to launch the saucer yet. I really liked it. She asked if it was possible to fly on this device and suggested that Yuan try it right away. The young man was sure that there would be no problems with this. He sat on the flying saucer and rose to a low altitude, saying that it was very stable. Before Yuan had time to get used to it, an overload signal came, and the saucer began to make an emergency landing, or rather, fall with the young man. The landing was not very soft, but at least the house was not damaged. Soon the smoke and dust cleared, and Yi rushed to Yuan, but he was unharmed, as was the saucer, although it had been badly shaken. It became clear that without improvements and upgrades, the saucer would not be able to transport people. But in the near future, the young man would improve it, and then everything would be fine. Yen imagined how surprised Yen would be when he woke up and saw the upgraded plate. The young man understood that it was better to upgrade it as soon as possible. Otherwise, they would not be able to help John if necessary. He told Yi to get ready to memorize all the steps, because now the young man was going to take apart the flying saucer. The girl sat down, concentrated, and stared at the saucer, saying that the boy could begin. Yen armed himself with a screwdriver and was ready to begin disassembly. The young man not only took the flying saucer apart into separate parts, he also analyzed it and noticed that there was a strong magnetic field in the center of the device. The rockets inside were quite small and considered compact in size. The current ammunition supply consisted of 1,000 rockets. Even for a small caliber, this was a lot. Yen realized that such a huge number of rockets meant that the saucer was designed as a device for killing enemies. Soon the saucer was dismantled piece by piece. One began to assemble the parts, and Yi prompted him when he made mistakes and put the parts in the wrong place. Yen was very pleased with this experience because his ability allowed him to disassemble the modules separately and reassemble them, gaining experience. After a while, the flying saucer was reassembled. He received information that a fire-breathing flying device with a connection had been discovered. This was followed by a process of scanning and improving the flying saucer. Yen not only improved the saucer, but also analyzed his abilities. He was amazed at how much easier it was for him to do everything with the flying saucer. He had indeed become much stronger. The young man was so absorbed in the process that he did not pay attention to the physical condition of the little girl, Yi, who was very tired from helping him. The girl was severely dehydrated, and Yuan immediately offered her water. Yi refused, saying that there was very little, and it was better to save it for John. It became clear that the girl was very weak and dehydrated. Then Yuan began to feed her. Now they had armor and a plate, which meant that there would be no more problems with provisions. They could eat as much as they wanted. Yi ate a little, but she had no strength, and after eating, she immediately wanted to sleep. Not surprising, since the girl had to constantly use her skills. Yin carried the beauty into the house and laid her down on the bed to rest. Leaving the girls safe for the night, Yuan went outside, planning to do some more improvements. It was extremely hot outside. Despite the night, the temperature was rising, and the monster was becoming more and more merciless. People could no longer escape from it. The earth was scorched, and people were turning to ash. Yuan understood that he had to find a way to get rid of the monster, otherwise all the people would die of thirst. The young man decided not to get distracted and to focus on improving the flying saucer's performance. It was unclear how to do this. Simply launch it into the air or shoot it with rockets. It turned out that as soon as it rose a few centimeters off the ground, the saucer immediately gained experience. Experience was also gained for hovering in the air and waiting mode. Thus, half an hour was enough to greatly strengthen the flying saucer. It became stronger, faster, and could carry heavier loads. Yen immediately climbed onto the saucer. The guy stood on the saucer and flew around the area. Everything was great, and he was pleased with the speed. But suddenly, danger warnings started popping up. Was it overloaded again? Information came that a mysterious creature was attacking him. He couldn't see it and was very alarmed. Someone's terrible claws struck the flying saucer. Barely holding on, Yuan saw a huge monster trying to jump onto the flying device. It was a wild giant, a mixture of dog, wolf, and human. If he didn't get away, he could die at the paws of such a monster. Wen immediately raised the saucer so that the giant couldn't reach him. But it turned out that the monster had tremendous jumping ability and managed to jump up. The flying saucer turned over in the air and became completely disoriented, unable to stay aloft. Yen realized that he couldn't rely solely on the plate. He put on his protective armor and was ready to fight the terrible monster. The monster jumped at Yuan, and until he could attack the giant, he could only dodge its attacks. Yen knew he couldn't let the monster break such a precious thing as the flying saucer. It could be useful in restraining the monster of heat. So the young man switched to close combat and shot at the monster with his weapon. But he missed his target because the giant monster was very fast. Yen fired shot after shot, but his opponent's speed was too great. Even the detectors couldn't keep up with the monster in any particular place. Yen concentrated, closed his eyes, and froze for a moment. Then he made one sharp lunge and the shot hit its target. The young man hit the monster. Of course, it was too early to talk about its destruction, but the giant was wounded. A wounded animal is always more dangerous because its instinct for self-preservation kicks in and its movements defy any logic. To his horror, Yuan realized that the monster was moving toward the house where his girlfriends were resting at that moment. The giant, wounded, rushed to lick its wounds. It ran, growling and making other sounds. Yi, sleepy and not understanding what had happened, opened the door, rubbing her eyes. She wanted to find out what the noise was. As soon as the girl appeared on the street, she immediately sensed great danger. A large black cloud was approaching. I did not have time to do anything. She looked at the huge, monstrous giant who was hovering over her as he jumped. Only a miracle could save the beauty. And that miracle happened. A very powerful gun appeared nearby. He covered her face with her hands, and pieces of blood and flesh from the giant monster, which had received 3 coveted holes in its body, flew in all directions. Yuan was in the right place at the right time, and his weapon and skills were enough to destroy the giant monster. The guy breathed a sigh of relief. He had managed to prevent a tragedy. The young man stood on the flying saucer with his legs wide apart, still holding the gun. Immediately, a notification came that the monster was dead. Its heart had stopped. The young man jumped off the saucer, realizing that only the Lord of Guns could shoot straight through. Before he could fully comprehend what had happened, Yi rushed into his arms. She was terribly frightened. The girl was sobbing, overcome with wild terror, because the huge wolf had almost devoured her. Now she needed to calm down, because Yuan had killed it. The young man suggested drinking the monster's blood before it curdled. In such heat, blood dries quickly, and it was necessary to seize the moment. Yi did not want to hear about drinking the monster's blood. She began to convulse at the mere suggestion. However, the girl understood that this was a necessary chance and agreed to drink this miraculous medicine. Yin himself also leaned over the monster's wound and began to drink its blood. It tasted the same as any other animal's blood. But literally a few seconds later, the guy felt a huge surge of powerful energy spread throughout his body. Now it became clear why this monstrous giant was so fast. Most likely, he possessed a very high level of power. Yuan immediately thought of the exhausted Jian. Such a drink would be good for the girl, giving her a large reserve of energy. The guy poured the monster's blood into a bowl and tried to use a spoon to feed it to the sleeping Jian, who still hadn't come to. But the girl was truly exhausted, so much so that she didn't even have the strength. Everything Yuan poured into her mouth ran down her chin, and soon the pillow under the beauty was soaked with the monster's blood. Yen realized that there was only one option left. He drank the contents of the bowl himself. Then he leaned over the beauty's body and poured the monster's blood into her mouth, using the mouth-to-mouth method. In this way, he tried to achieve the result of getting the blood of the slain monster into the girl's body. Jin opened her eyes. The surge of energy was so powerful that she immediately jumped up and began to thank Yuan for saving her. Yen asked her not to scream in his ear like that next time, because he was almost deafened by her scream. He understood that although Jian had woken up, her body had not yet recovered, so he let her rest some more. Yi said she would guarantee safety and stay outside the house on guard. Jin offered to help her friend. Both understood that Yuan needed a rest, because he had been fighting monsters. The young man, in fact, hoped to improve his skills again. But as soon as Yuan's head touched the pillow, he literally fell asleep. Yuan slept peacefully and deeply. Yi, hearing that the boy had woken up, looked through the window and happily announced that he had slept almost the entire day and that it was already nearing sunset. Wen, without having time to explain his behavior, jumped up and rushed off somewhere. He looked clearly alarmed because he was late. The young man ran out into the street and froze, trying to understand what other visions had occurred in his life. The fact was that a huge, improved flying saucer was hovering in the air. Yi reported that she had not allowed anyone to approach the shelter, including the flying saucer. This meant that the flying saucer had undergone significant upgrades over a long period of time, and now it could be improved by several levels at once. Yen happily took on the task. He upgraded the saucer as much as his experience allowed. The upgrade was so long and powerful that Yi was already looking at this giant saucer with fear. The girl began to literally squeal, and these sounds attracted Jian, who came out of the house to check the situation, but also froze, her mouth agape. Yuan continued to improve, and thought it was a wonderful feeling to be able to indulge his every whim. The young man was absolutely happy and loved such sensations. His saucer was at its maximum, allowing him to fly for a long time without stopping, shoot very far, carry large loads, and develop the highest speed. It immediately became clear that the shells needed to be strengthened, because now the saucer could carry them, and it was necessary to take ones that could kill the monster. Jin advised the young man not to be too reckless, because even in a war zone with advanced technology and mutants, it was not possible to destroy the monsters. Yuan decided to first raise his personal level, then upgrade the characteristics of the items again, and only then go after the monster. Yen understood that most of the squad must already be far away, but with such a flying saucer, he could solve any problems while staying away from the squad itself. The guy continued to figure out what kind of cooler he needed to invent. He told his friends that he wanted to get parts for the cooler from the military, but didn't want to be exposed. Jen knew that the main group had protective animals. Perhaps they had already left the monster territory, and instead of contacting them, it would be better to find the main group and negotiate. Yen remembered that he had a remote control and turned on the radar located on the flying saucer. The size of the improved flying saucer was so enormous that the young man could scan the entire area at once. In addition, the quality of the radar had improved, and now it was possible to see everything in the smallest details. Soon, the young man saw a large group of people on the radar. They were in a gorge between two mountains. However, for some reason, the whole group had stopped. Perhaps something had happened. The young man decided to enlarge the map and zoom in. He discovered that the cooling range on the safety zone tower had signaled that the cooling was insufficient and had stopped working. The military recorded on their radar that an unknown thermal weapon was aimed at them. Lieutenant Colonel Chen suggested activating the suppression device. The lieutenant colonel put on his communication device and requested permission to use the protective beast. Ken was surprised. The enemy was rushing at such a tremendous speed that his eyes bulged out of his head. This was something unexpected, even for such an experienced military man. The soldiers reported that the attackers were clearly not representatives of a technological civilization. Most likely, they were some kind of third party. The military's portable radar only scanned empty territory, and the current environment did not allow for the launch of a thermal satellite. The lieutenant colonel realized that the enemy's technology was apparently much more advanced than that currently possessed by the army, or that the enemies were not within a radius of 100 kilometers at all. As much as he wanted to avoid it, there was nothing he could do in this situation. He had to call him, and the lieutenant colonel gave the appropriate order. After a while, a man of very strange appearance entered the command post. A thin, gray-haired old man. This strange man's name was Liliang Kai. He possessed special psychic abilities, namely the ability to avoid misfortune, and apparently worked for the army. The lieutenant colonel led the man to the radars and asked him to quickly see what they would be facing in the near future. Chen hoped that this time, too, the ability to avoid misfortune would help everyone. However, Mr. Li's reaction was very strange. He bulged his eyes, opened his mouth, and held up 2 fingers on each hand. Outwardly, he looked like a madman. Li began to hop up and down, tapping out a rhythm and saying the words, "Spirits of heaven, spirits of earth, spirits, all gods and immortals appear." It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so terrifying. The man turned to the window and shouted that a large flying saucer was approaching. The lieutenant colonel thought that aliens had come to this world. That's all this unfortunate planet needed. He began to find out what exactly the old man had seen. The old man was of no use. He just screamed at the top of his lungs, fell to his knees, and tried to cover his head. Old man Li hid behind the lieutenant colonel and reported that the flying saucer had dropped the corpse of an unusual creature on the ground. Another horror immediately popped into Lieutenant Colonel Chen's head. He figured the creature's corpse was the source of some new interstellar infection. But Old Man Li began to calm down. He felt that something good was about to happen, but there was also something bad. The old man realized that someone was counting them, and at the same time, it looked as if no harm would be done. In short, the old man himself did not understand what was happening. The lieutenant colonel understood that the old man's abilities did not work every time. He sent the man away and instructed those involved in turning stone into metal to hurry up with the creation of metal and build protective structures as soon as possible in the epidemic control center to prepare. He also instructed them to keep an eye on the flying saucer, and if anything was discovered, to send out signals of friendship and consider cooperation. Old Man Li, already leaving his command post, shouted that he had been telling the truth, but the situation was really complicated, and the last thing they needed was visitors. Yan Wen also couldn't understand what was happening. He stood in front of his radar and couldn't understand where the entire area had disappeared to. The young man guessed that it was most likely due to his enlargement of the map. He had caused the flying saucer to automatically target the safety zone, and now they had been detected by the military. She confirmed that if they had been discovered, it would be impossible to escape because the flying saucer was too big. Yen realized that they needed to destroy the protection that was limiting their actions. The young man looked at the huge soul of the monster he had killed and realized that the energy contained in this soul was so great that it would be possible to get rich. Yi overheard her friend's conversation and asked if Yuan really wanted to trade with the safety zone. Indeed, he would like to sell the monster's blood, but he did not understand how he could transport everyone to the safety zone. But he remembered that the guys had collected many parts from the destroyed flying saucers before they found a suitable one, and now a brilliant idea came to the guy's mind. Soon, all the collected materials were sorted and systematized. He set aside several iron pipes and some other remnants. Fortunately, Yuan had enough physical strength to create objects without special tools or equipment. He began to twist the metal pipes into rings. A short time later, a giant metal chain with tongs at the end appeared before the eyes of the surprised girls. On the other side, the guy attached heavy magnetic blocks and secured them with a smaller chain. Soon he had a new item called a magnetic hook. However, there was a small drawback. This magnetic hook could only carry a load weighing 10 kilograms. Yan thought for a moment, then took the huge chain and began to swing it over his head to launch it somewhere. There was a lot of force to fall, and soon the magnet on the chain stuck tightly to the bottom of the flying saucer. Everything worked out as planned. Yuan was very pleased, and the girls watched with admiration and interest. Yi guessed that this probe would be able to lift the monster's carcass, but the young man had to first improve the lifting capacity of the magnetic probe. Yin attached some kind of part to the probe, lifted the flying saucer along with this object, and hoped that the experience would begin to increase. Unfortunately, for some reason, the experience did not increase. The saucer simply hung in the air, and the magnetic hook held the inserted object. Yuan decided that the problem was that the object was not heavy enough. He needed to attach something more cumbersome. But as soon as the guy started pulling the object out of the tongs, the experience points immediately started coming in. It turned out that it was enough to simply clamp something in the probe, and this increased the level. He got really into it, jerking the object back and forth. The girls watched their friend and even decided that Yuan seemed to have gone mad. Some time passed and the powerful magnetic claws capable of lifting huge loads were created to their maximum potential. Yuan was a little out of breath, but still satisfied. After that, the guy told the girls to look after each other and not to leave the cooling zone while he went to a safe area to negotiate with the army. The young man was confident that everything would work out perfectly and that his girlfriends would finally get some good news. After that, a huge magnetic probe was lowered from the flying saucer onto the slain monster, and it seemed that it was time to fly off to the negotiations. But Wen remembered something else and decided to prepare himself if he was going to do a good job. The radars on the security zone tower were flashing red again. The military noted that the heat source was approaching. Most likely, it was some kind of unknown drone. Lieutenant Colonel Chen thought that this was the flying machine that Old Man Li had mentioned. And indeed, this huge flying saucer of a strange animal was now visible on the radars. The Lieutenant Colonel noted that it was very similar to their fiery flying saucer, but looked much more powerful than the ones owned by the Army. The Lieutenant Colonel remembered that in his previous unit, he had a psychic with the magnifying glass skill. Most likely, this was his doing. The Lieutenant Colonel understood that the fiery saucer itself had no communication function, and if they wanted to send a message, the information would have to be written directly on the body of the flying saucer. The commander ordered his subordinates to monitor the situation and act according to the circumstances. Soon, one of the soldiers reported to the Lieutenant Colonel that there was indeed an inscription on the flying saucer. It looked amazing. Some hieroglyphs, numbers, and drawings were painted on the bottom of the giant flying saucer. All that remained was to decipher this incomprehensible message. Lieutenant Colonel Chen was not well versed in rebuses, but he knew that the manual for communicating with other units did not contain such words. Perhaps the inscription had some literal meaning. The soldier guessed that the enemy was not an organization or a mysterious client, but some kind of very powerful awakened being who wanted to exchange this corpse for goods and resources. The commander knew that ordinary awakened ones were not very strong, so at first he did not even consider this possibility. However, they should not be underestimated. With such a fiery flying saucer, one awakened one could easily destroy an entire camp. The soldier suggested leaving the flying saucer alone and not interfering with it when it flew away. Let the awakened one fall into their own trap. The lieutenant colonel agreed. It was a great idea because the awakened one was indeed very strong. It had been several days since they had discovered this thing, but they still could not understand all the details. Soon, the military set out on a campaign with special equipment and tanks. One of the subordinates ran up and reported to the lieutenant colonel that there was a whole detachment ahead, but this detachment did not belong to the survivors. These were intelligent beings living in ancient ruins, but they were not human. The lieutenant colonel could not quite understand what his subordinate meant. He climbed onto the tank turret and began to look through binoculars. What he saw struck the soldier. Before him were creatures very similar to humans, but it was immediately apparent how strong they were. These creatures had well-developed muscles, their bodies were completely hairless, and their heads were topped with antennae resembling snail horns. The soldier reported that it was unclear whether these creatures could see humans. However, for now, they completely ignored the presence of people, as if they were simply wandering through the ancient ruins. The lieutenant colonel knew that terrible monster powers were hidden in these ancient ruins, and the military could not release them. After thinking for a while, Lieutenant Colonel Chen ordered his subordinates to dig trenches and hold their positions. He looked at the huge flying saucer that had brought the monster's carcass and thought that now humans had the opportunity to get closer to those creatures. The flying saucer moved across the sky. Yun watched what was happening on his radar, but at some point, thick fog blocked his entire view. The young man decided that the military had some kind of technology that allowed them to create such a large and dense fog cover. At that very moment, the lieutenant colonel ordered the fog to be dispersed so that the awakened one would be visible to another civilization. Soon the fog did indeed dissipate a little, and the flying saucer was able to fly through and transmit signals to Yuan. He saw some ancient ruins that gave off an oppressive feeling of cold. The young man noticed that the military unit had stopped and was creating a safe zone. Were they doing this for the ruins? But soon Yuan's eyes fell on some very unusual creatures, clearly belonging to another civilization. The flying saucer hovered over the safe zone, and now Yuan could see clearly what was happening among the soldiers. The lieutenant colonel did not understand why those people were not reacting. Perhaps they did not notice the flying saucer or simply did not perceive it as a threat. The soldiers examined the saucer. It was simply enormous. The men decided that the enemy did not want to harm them and that there was no need to worry about it for the time being. Soon the flying saucer released the probe, and a huge carcass fell in front of the soldiers. A subordinate asked what they should do with it, but the lieutenant colonel was more interested in the representatives of the extraterrestrial civilization. The man looked through his binoculars again and noticed that they had begun to react in some way. The commander ordered the soldiers to check the value of the carcass and at the same time determine how they would interact with the owner of the flying saucer. Several soldiers used sensors to scan the body of the monster they had brought in. They reported that the creature had reached the first limit and was worth 10,000 coolers. Lieutenant Colonel Chen armed himself with a loudspeaker and shouted toward the flying saucer, "How much will the goods brought in coolers cost?" Yang Yuan watched the proceedings on the monitor. He could see that they were trying to talk to him, but of course he couldn't hear anything. The lieutenant colonel decided that the customer was dissatisfied, which was why he was not responding. But the man thought that a dissatisfied customer might become aggressive. The soldier assumed that this flying saucer did not have an external switchboard, so perhaps they could not hear the sound. This meant that a response had to be written. Soon the words, "The value of the goods delivered is estimated at 10,000 coolers. The military is also giving 10,000 bullets as a gift," appeared on Yuan's screen. Suddenly, a red light lit up on the bottom of the flying saucer, and everyone immediately became alert. It was impossible to tell whether the strangers in the flying saucer would attack. Yen pressed the buttons a few times, hoping that the soldiers in the security zone would understand everything right away. Sure enough, the flying saucer made several movements in the air, as if writing, "Okay." Lieutenant Colonel Chen gave the order to pack up the body of the ancient predatory creature and put all the ordered goods into the empty compartment. Soon the bottom of the flying saucer opened, and the soldiers began to load the goods. Everyone watched what was happening and thought how great it would be if such a huge and useful flying saucer could be used in the life of the security zone. Finally, the goods were loaded, and the flying saucer rose into the air and flew away. The lieutenant colonel was pleased that everything had gone smoothly. However, new trouble was not long in coming. It turned out that the enemy had begun to deploy troops in the direction of the security zone. It seemed that they were preparing to attack. The lieutenant colonel immediately began to command everyone with combat capabilities, covering the retreat of the people. Half an hour passed when suddenly the lieutenant colonel's subordinates, who were supposed to retreat, appeared before him, but the soldiers did not know how this had happened. They had simply been walking and accidentally returned. Most likely, the settlement was no longer inhabited, and the soldiers had probably stumbled upon someone's lair. The lieutenant colonel understood that using the Rising Clouds artifact, with which they were helping people leave the danger zone, had a price, but it couldn't last long. They needed to leave this place urgently. Of course, they could destroy the lair, and then they wouldn't have to leave, but it was unclear how to do that. The flying saucer landed near Yuan's safe house. He went outside and called the girls, saying he needed help. Yin told the girls to move some of their belongings into the room. This had to be done fairly quickly. After that, when the girls were free, they would need to dismantle the items for parts because Yuen wanted to rebuild something. The guy wanted to strengthen the coolers, and then the area of their camp would expand because sitting in the house was boring and they needed to stretch their legs. The work was, of course, not difficult, but the girls spent a lot of time disassembling the coolers into separate parts. Yuen was not resting either. He was working on improving and strengthening the power of the coolers. The guy had already gained enough experience to improve, and indeed, this experience was enough to greatly increase his capabilities. In addition, the guy's physical indicators also improved. After that, Yuen was able to upgrade the coolers. If he didn't, they would soon resemble dried meat. After upgrading the coolers, the temperature around them dropped, and he was able to cool the water quickly. Sitting in the hut, Yi and Jun immediately felt how much cooler it had become and realized that Yuen had accomplished what he had set out to do. Jen went outside and asked her friend what he had done because it had become much cooler in the hut. Maybe it was just that it wasn't as hot outside as it had been before. The girl poked her finger at the protective sphere again and got burned again. Yin said that the temperature outside had already reached almost 80 degrees. It was terrible. It was only early morning and it was already so hot. It was clear that by evening the temperature would rise even higher. Yi also came out of the house and suddenly smelled something burning. Everyone turned in the direction she pointed and saw fires blazing in the distance behind the rocks. Jin immediately estimated how far away the fire was and thought how lucky they were to be out of the way. She was worried that the fire would reach them. She was very anxious and frightened. Yen believed that they were fortunate. The wind was blowing in the other direction, but if it changed direction, disaster would ensue. Jin suggested that Wen find a place to live without plants. Then they would not have to fear any fire. The young people packed the parts from the coolers into boxes. Jin was upset by what was happening and did not notice that she had started packing old coolers that had not yet been upgraded. Yen pointed this out to her, taking her by the hand. After that, the girl decided that she would never wash her hand again because her beloved man had touched it. Having gained another dose of experience, Yuen decided again that he needed to level up before venturing into dangerous territory. He activated all the upgrades, but did not feel any particular changes. But suddenly the system started to display some errors, and the young man literally froze in place, paralyzed. The next moment, there was a loud explosion inside the system, and everything around the guy flew apart into red shards. But when the dust settled, it turned out that everything was basically fine. No harm had been done. It was just that the feeling between the previous and current levels was very different. Perhaps some special stage had begun. Yen looked at the flying saucer hovering above the house and jumped up. His abilities were enough to easily jump onto the flying saucer. It turned out that the guy had become practically superhuman. However, in the future, in order to increase levels, it would be necessary to spend more experience points. Moreover, his previous experience had disappeared. Perhaps the method of gaining experience had changed, or everything had been completely reset. Yen spotted another prejudice on his radar. He saw a huge fire monster that was no longer some mythical creature. Such monsters used to be like dolls, but now this thing looked completely different. Perhaps it was an unusual monster, another type of anomalous beast. They say this type of monster craves water, but its power also evaporates water. It is forced to constantly search for new water sources, burning the land around it. If it is not stopped, the whole world will turn into hell due to the constant heat. But before engaging in battle with such a monster, Yuen decided to upgrade his equipment. He made himself dynamic armor. It cooled very quickly, was flexible and comfortable. In addition, the young man added optical camouflage. It was very convenient. He would no longer have to suffer from the lack of water. The young man easily jumped off the flying saucer without any difficulties or problems. Huge monsters resembling buffaloes with fiery details on their bodies were full of hatred. There were many monsters, and they all came out of the cave, wanting to destroy everything in their path. Yen cut down these monsters with his sword, but then he noticed that someone else was participating in this hunt besides him. Soon, the young man realized that these were the masters of the earth element. They were probably going to seal these monstrous beasts by building a barrier of boulders in front of the herd. Representatives of the fire element also participated in the hunt, burning the monsters with fire. Their joint efforts, of course, led to a positive result. The creatures, driven into a corner, were burned. The warriors rejoiced at their success, for the operation had been a success. They used spikes on the ground to block the monsters and then burned them. Now the men were searching for magical cores. Yuan did not understand how such huge monsters could be killed so easily. Perhaps it was not a monster, but a spirit born in high temperatures. Even if it wasn't a spirit, the monster would still cause heat and drought, so they needed to warn John and the others as soon as possible. Yen left the plate in the air to gain experience, and he himself, using his turbo devices, descended to his friends. Jen was interested in whether their comrade had found a place to relocate that would suit all parameters. Yen said that he had inspected the place where the stone monsters were gathering, the stone forest. Everything there had already been leveled, and now it was a good place for a camp. The young man suggested moving there quickly because he had recently noticed a monster that had caused a forest fire. Suddenly, Yi sensed the approaching danger and managed to warn her friends. Jen knew that Yuan's gun was inside the hut and rushed to get the weapon. Yang Yuan didn't even have time to figure out what was going on. He didn't see the approaching threat. Suddenly, a stone spike shot out of the ground at tremendous speed, throwing Yuan high into the air. Only thanks to his recent improvement in physical condition and power armor did Yuan survive, albeit with minor injuries. Yin Yen watched in horror. They could only scream as they watched the situation unfold. Yi once again sensed a great danger approaching. She thought she saw a large black figure of some creature appear behind her. This creature stretched out its vile hands and said, "Goodbye." The next moment, a stranger landed right in front of the friends. He did it so powerfully that he formed a pit beneath him. Jian and Yuan watched in horror and did not understand where Yi had gone. It seemed that the stranger was also unaware of this. He began to look around when suddenly he noticed another girl. Jin jumped out of the house with a gun in her hands and shouted that this freak shouldn't underestimate her. The man said that the gun was too weak against him, waved his hand, and immediately a rock appeared between them. The man would probably have done something else if the bullet fired from Yian's pistol hadn't blown the rock to smithereens. Yuan watched the stranger, not understanding what was happening to him and why he was attacking people. Due to his injuries, Yuan couldn't use all of his abilities. However, part of his neural interface was unaffected, and he was still able to control the flying saucer. Yuan approached Yan from behind, surrounded her, and said that her injuries were minor, but his equipment was broken. He couldn't just let this man go. Yen used the girl's pistol and blew up the rock again. The stranger did not understand what kind of weapon it was. The man stopped trying to harm them and immediately dove underground, trying to hide. Yi seemed to come to her senses and showed Yuan where the villain was hiding. Wen reacted immediately and fired in the right direction. The bullet hit the enemy. However, unfortunately, it did not kill him, but only wounded him, flooding the entire area with blood. The man disappeared underground again, saying that next time he would not miss and would destroy this company. He continued to scan the surrounding area so as not to let this villain escape. The girl's actions were very successful. She saw the silhouette of a man inside the rock. She pointed out a specific rock to Yuan, and another shot blew the rock to pieces. When the stones fell and the dust settled, the stranger raised a white flag and said that there was no need to shoot because he was surrendering. The man was from a demon-slaying squad. He knew that the demon-slaying squad was supposed to destroy those horn guys, but unfortunately, he had no intention of following the rules that existed among humans. Yuan put the gun to the man's forehead and told him to say goodbye to life. The next shot blew off his useless head. But the problems did not end there. Soon another rock appeared from under the ground, and the stranger shouted, "The fifth one was killed!" In a few moments, the entire area was littered with sharp rocks, and on them stood members of a demon-slaying squad who were going to avenge the death of their comrade. Yuan recognized them as monster slayers. The young man understood that it would be difficult for him to deal with this group alone, especially since his physical abilities were impaired. Suddenly, a shadow covered the entire area, and the warrior raised his head, thinking that some clouds had come in. But it was not clouds, but a huge flying saucer hovering over the demon slayers. The mood of the men immediately changed. One of the men raised his hands in a gesture of reconciliation and said that they were all from a squad of demon hunters. They were heroes who served the people, and most likely there had been a mistake. Next to him was a young woman who believed that these words were unlikely to help and that they should just remain calm. Yen was surprised that the stranger called himself a hero after what they had just done. How dare they defile the word hero when they had just attacked defenseless girls? Yuan gave the command to advance. In the next moment, explosive devices were launched from the flying saucer. The rockets flew toward their targets at very high speed. Soon, everything around them looked like hell. Rocks exploded and explosions thundered. Yuan grabbed his girlfriends and rushed with them to hide from the consequences of the explosions. But suddenly he felt that Yi was disappearing right in his arms. Yen saved Yin by covering her with his body. It hurt, of course, but it was good that his body was strong. The girl was embarrassed after such a strong embrace. He soon reappeared in front of the guy. She sat on his lap. It was all very strange. At that moment, a quarrel broke out among the representatives of the demon-slaying squad. One of them claimed that they should not have been greedy, another said that things just went wrong, and a third wanted to view what was happening as fun. In the end, they all found one extreme person, after whose arrival everything went awry. The guys wanted to figure out what this thing was, which looked like a giant flying disc. The commander of the advance guard told the soldiers that it was a flying saucer. Yanwen asked them why they had attacked his group. The guys started spouting more nonsense, saying that they had heard an SOS signal and had just come to see the people who lived in the area. Yen looked at the group and did not believe that they were from the advance guard. These warriors looked more like slaves. In addition, the body of the fifth man who had been killed had a tattoo that was now visible to everyone. Cheng Xin, the commander of the advance guard, knew the meaning of this tattoo. The fifth man was a lover of women, so he had come to take the girls. Of course, beauties like Yi and Jian attracted his attention. The girls finally came to their senses after what had happened, and now did not want to leave each other, because they had just been in danger. The fifth said that one of the girls was too young. He was most likely referring to Yi. Yen was very angry because he understood the fifth man's plan, but the squad leader asked him to lower his gun, saying that although they were also demon hunters, they were not associated with the gang of villains. The girl claimed that such a gun would not harm her, but immediately after she said this, a shot rang out. Everyone present was stunned to see the rock shatter into small pieces. The fat man began to explain that they just wanted to observe what was happening, because they were ordinary demon hunters, not an official organization. This information interested Yuan, so he was dealing with volunteers. The girl was very nervous. She began to snap aggressively, saying that he should understand who demon hunters were. The squad leader explained that demon hunters were a team of fighters with superpowers created by the Earth Alliance to destroy demons. Anyone with superpowers could join. Yuan laughed at the boys, saying that they were too weak to be demon hunters. In the end, they confirmed that they could indeed only handle weak creatures. Wu Chengxin explained that the most important monster was an anomaly that reversed yin and yang. It could turn people, anomalies, and beasts into its own kind. Like true monsters of this species, they emit strong invisible light and heat, but are still quite weak and easy to kill. After that, the commander honestly said that they just want to make some money, are not going to complain to the authorities, and ask them not to kill them. After that, the commander handed Yuan her business card and invited him to join their team, because anyone with superpowers could join. Yen wasn't sure if this organization was reliable. He really wanted to destroy the monster, but he hadn't decided whether to join yet. After that, the whole company turned around and went about their business. Wu Chengxin said goodbye to the guy, saying that if fate brought them together, they would definitely meet again. Yen was amazed as he watched these people disappear into thin air. Their powers were truly amazing. But even with their abilities, Yuan was sure they couldn't escape him. No living creature could do that. About 10 kilometers from that place, another group of fighters appeared from the ground. The man was alarmed because they had almost been blown up, but the girl was glad that they had managed to get out of trouble. These were the comrades of the fifth, who were now left without their leader, who possessed very necessary abilities. It was interesting how these people were able to see the fifth underground or in the rock. And the gun that broke rocks was some kind of heavenly miracle. They had worked hard, but could not obtain such a weapon. It was unclear how to proceed. The assault squad was gone, and it might be necessary to return and gather reinforcements. The commander was pensive. She knew that the ability to increase speed and merge with nature was very difficult. Soon a huge flying saucer appeared above the fighters again. A magnetic probe holding some kind of box descended from it. The fighters assumed that an explosion was about to occur, and they would all perish. The fat man began to get extremely nervous. He was already unable to move at all because he was in a state of deep stress. At that moment, the probe released the box it was holding, and it began to fall at tremendous speed toward the soldiers, who had already given up hope of surviving the day. The object fell, scattering dirt and stones around it. When no explosion followed, the fighters cautiously approached the unfamiliar object. It turned out to be a huge rock with hieroglyphs written on it. The man suggested that it seemed they wanted to make them targets and destroy the nearest monsters first. In the end, the fighters decided it was time to run and scattered in all directions. At that moment, the flying saucer descended very low, and the men decided that their last day had come. The commander ran up to her subordinates and told them to shut up, follow the saucer's instructions, and go kill the monsters. Everyone listened to the commander, although some were outraged that anyone could give them orders as if they were someone's lapdogs. Soon, the fighters began to destroy the monsters, which they could easily handle, while the flying saucer hovered above them, watching what was happening. The warriors destroyed their enemies with fire and cut them down with their swords. Chung Xin managed to jump onto the back of a huge monster and stab his sword right into the monster's neck vertebrae. The monster died almost instantly, and a huge magical red stone popped out of it. The fat man caught the stone and was happy. Today, they had been particularly successful in killing monsters. Another member of the team, who possessed enormous physical strength, said that the flying saucer had enraged him so much that he was taking out all his anger on the monsters. The squad leader looked at the flying saucer and thought that this object seemed to restrain the monster, and perhaps working with this guy wasn't such a bad idea. Jen and Yi were waiting for him in Yang Yuan's safe house. The young man had finally returned home. He told the girls that there was no need to move. There were people who helped kill small monsters nearby, and no huge monsters would appear here. Wen deliberately did not kill these people so that they could clear the area. And besides, they were not connected to the villains, so there was no need for revenge. It was not entirely clear what abilities they possessed. Jin believed that they should not be completely trusted. One must be careful to prevent betrayal. Yen reassured the girl, saying that he would make sure these fighters did not approach their home. Then he checked her hand, because after the shots, she was injured due to the strong recoil of the weapon. Her arm was fine, and the young man set about restoring his armor and other damaged abilities. Yen did not want the girl's help because she had not yet fully recovered, and it was not worth using her abilities unnecessarily. Jean blushed again and said that she was already feeling much better. Yen saw the worried look on his friend's face and thought she was acting through the pain. He needed a healthy girlfriend, and girls needed to take care of themselves. Jin suddenly rushed over to Yi and asked where she had disappeared to when she was having problems. We said that she thought she was going to die, so her body blended in with her surroundings, and now she knew how to hide. In addition, there was more positive news. The radius of sensitivity had become significantly wider, but there was another issue. In her haste, she accidentally stepped outside the cooling zone. Nothing seemed to have happened, but something was still wrong with her body, although perhaps it was just her imagination. Everyone was glad that Ritushure got off with a slight scare, but then the girl finally remembered what she wanted to show her friends. She held out a folded piece of paper and said she had stumbled upon it while sorting through her belongings. It was a letter from the owner of an anomalous power. He offered to join his ranks and guaranteed the best conditions. A weapon with a mass destruction function would be very useful. The letter also mentioned a group called Wonders of Heaven. The young man had never heard of such wonders before. Now the young man had a choice: join the demon-slaying squad or stay in the safe zone. In the end, he decided not to pay attention to it for now, and not to make a final choice, but to leave both options open. Yuan was completely satisfied with his life, and therefore was in no hurry to change anything. Besides, if his abilities became even stronger, there would definitely be better places for him. The young man pondered this as he once again improved his weapon. Now it was a huge royal revolver with a crazy supply of ammunition, guaranteeing uninterrupted firing. The young man immediately went outside to test the weapon, and it turned out that after hitting the target, there was an explosion that caused enormous damage. But that was far from the limit. Yuan decided to further strengthen the weapon and increased its range to 1 kilometer without losing power. After upgrading the weapon, the young man went out again to test it and gain experience. The explosion was very powerful. In addition, the recoil increased again, and Yuan held the weapon with both hands. Jen and Yi rushed out of the house when they heard the strange sound and were seriously frightened, worried about their beloved Yuan. Jen looked at the pile of boulders left over from the shot fired by the royal revolver. She knew that only a powerful weapon could break such huge stones. Shengshin was destroying another monster. It was clear that the girl was already tired of this monotonous and difficult work. Her subordinates were literally exhausted. They had no strength left. They had been killing monsters all day, and besides, they had not gotten the monster's core. The commander was also tired, but she replied that now was not the time to rest. She did not allow them to stop working, so the guys had to get up and continue to perform their duties or try to run away. But it was unknown whether they would succeed with a flying saucer. They had to destroy all the monsters they encountered along the way, but under no circumstances were they to touch the elite stone monster. Of course, it sounded strange. Who would need an elite stone monster? Soon it became clear what kind of monster they were talking about. It was a real giant, almost as big as a mountain. It was made entirely of stone, and on its chest, its ribs looked like diverging stone strips glowing with red light. The man watched the monster from his hiding place and realized that even a flying saucer would seem like a speck of dust to such a stone monster. He had an explosive device. Creeping as close as possible, the warrior threw a grenade at the stone monster. There was no response. The monster sat motionless, and the man prepared to use a couple more hand grenades, throwing them at the monster again. This time, the giant stone monster reacted. It jumped to its feet and tried to dodge the explosions. The man began to act as bait, running in front of the monster and luring it in the desired direction. Yang Yun upgraded his pistol several more times, but it seemed that he had reached the limit. When upgrading from level 10 to the next levels, qualitative changes should occur, but so far the Royal Revolver had not changed in any way. It turned out that first he needed to create an 11th level item, a recoil-free pistol artifact with maximum firing range and explosive bullets. The guy was literally happy and in love with his weapon. Now he was the owner of an artifact. His happiness was interrupted by his alarmed friends, who heard strange new sounds, but Yi, unfortunately, did not sense any danger yet. Perhaps she was still too far away. Yun reassured the girls, saying that they should not worry. It was just a stone monster. Indeed, a group of stone monsters was approaching them, led by the giant monster that the man had provoked the day before. He felt that a great danger was approaching from behind. Even Yuan tensed up as he watched the huge stone monsters approach. The young man had not fired a single shot yet, but he had a gun in his hand. Yi and Yin were frightened not so much for themselves as for the life of their friend. The girls could not help and could only watch. Yin decided that this was an excellent situation and an opportunity to test the power of the artifact. He raised his hand with the pistol, preparing to shoot. The man who had provoked the giant stone monster and lured it here peered out from behind a rock. He knew that even the most powerful pistol would not be able to pierce such a monster. The stranger was happy, knowing that today Yuan would finally die and stop interfering. The guy fired several shots and the bullets tore through the powerful stones in their path. The giant stone monster was immediately knocked off its feet, wounded by a single shot. Yang Yun was very pleased with the result. He immediately realized that the artifact pistol was indeed a serious weapon. The giant stone monster had already lost one arm and got up, preparing to attack again. But Yun raised his hand with the artifact pistol and fired another shot. This time, the giant stone monster was instantly torn to pieces, and the ordinary stone monsters watched in shock, trying to avoid the consequences of the explosion. The unfamiliar man stood with his mouth open and his eyes wide. He had just seen a huge stone monster die from only 2 shots. It was impossible. Yen continued firing to deal with the ordinary stone monsters and completely eliminate the problem. After that, the young man went to wander through the ruins and remains of the stone monsters to find magical cores. And indeed, his search was successful. He obtained a huge glowing red core. One could literally feel its power. It was at least 30 times stronger than the core of a normal elite monster. Wen's thoughts were interrupted by the cry of an unfamiliar man who jumped out from behind a rock, fell to his knees, raised his hands, and begged not to be killed. The man realized his mistake and would never dare to do such a thing again. Yen realized that this man had deliberately brought the giant stone monster here. The young man began to approach the man, who was crawling on his knees, begging him not to come near and kill him, but simply to forgive him. But then Wu Qingxin jumped out from behind the mountain and kicked her subordinate down with her foot. The girl was furious because she had told everyone several times not to dare to do such a thing. After that, the girl turned to Yuan, explaining that this fool was asking for forgiveness and would personally compensate for his mistakes. The commander of the survivors squad was genuinely concerned and asked Yuan to let this foolish man go because he was a member of her team and the team needed his strength. Wen asked, "Does she really want him to live, even though he almost killed him and his loved ones?" The warriors understood how this sounded and agreed that their comrade had committed an unforgivable act and should pay with his life. Wu Qingxin understood the gravity of the act, but still hoped that Yuan would spare the man's life. because the team needed his strength. Yan listened to all the pleas and fired. A wild scream rang out. The young man had shot very close to the villain, making a huge dent in the rock and wounding the man in the leg. Yun said that he was not going to save the villain, but was willing not to kill him, and in return demanded that the demon of drought be handed over. Then he would let him go. Upon hearing this proposal, all the members of the team immediately pelted Yuan with stones, begging him to spare them and let them live. The young man took all the cores and the fighters picked up the wounded man and went home, hoping never to meet again. Jin and Yi ran up when everyone had dispersed. The girls were amazed at the huge number of cores their protector and friend had obtained. Now they didn't have to worry about the immediate future or any material problems. He noted that it was still very hot outside, which was strange since such a huge number of drought demons had already died. Why did this hellish heat persist? Yen analyzed the condition of the house, improved it once again, but said that it was time to look for a more suitable place for the base. As a result of the improvements, their portable house could be folded together with all the interior items into a small flat suitcase. The girls were amazed. Their base now fit into such a small suitcase, and everything they needed was hidden away. Yen confirmed the improvement. Now their house was stronger, more powerful, and more compact. The company had not yet set out to find a better place to live when they felt a pleasant breeze that had not visited the earth for a long time. But it was too early to rejoice. On the horizon, the friends saw a tornado-like hurricane moving in their direction. But then another miracle happened. It started to rain. It was unbelievable. How could it rain in such heat? The main thing was that the water flowed, cooling everything down, and finally they could drink. And indeed, the storm soon approached. However, our heroes did not hide. They put all their belongings in the flying saucer and remained in the rain themselves. One took off his t-shirt and happily exposed his powerful, beautiful body to the raindrops, which washed away the dust and fatigue. The girls also enjoyed the rain like a shower. But soon Yuan stated that in such weather conditions, there are no such strong temperature changes, which means that someone artificially created the storm. Who could have such a powerful ability? At that moment, the gust of wind became even stronger. Yi was caught up in it and almost flew away. The girl screamed and called out to Yuan. Yuan rushed to catch up with her, and at the last moment managed to grab Yi by the ankle, preventing the wind from carrying her away. Yin held Yi tightly against him and reached out with his other hand to grab Jin. The young man understood that if the storm continued and intensified, his friends would be in trouble. But he also understood that they needed to leave this area urgently. Shen was alarmed. She did not understand how they would manage to escape such a hurricane. Yin thought that armor would be very useful now. It was time to improve it. The young man had gained enough experience and immediately set about repairing and strengthening the armor. Soon the improvement was complete, and Yuan shouted to his friends to come closer. Now he would be able to protect them. Yi, shielded by her friend's powerful body, was almost safe. But she peeked out from under his arm and saw something that alarmed her again. A huge stone boulder was approaching the people, and judging by its size, it could completely crush them. Yen reacted instantly. He raised his hand and activated the laser firing device. The laser began to destroy the stone, and everything worked out as planned. Yuan was delighted. His abilities were powerful enough to destroy such a threat. But it became clear that they couldn't stay here. The guys rushed to gather all their valuables and put them in a box because it was becoming impossible to resist the strong wind. When everything was packed, Yen brought the flying saucer with a magnetic hook closer. He planned to leave the area with his flying machine. The girls also loaded themselves into the huge box with valuable items. Yuan stood on the box, grabbed the rope, and commanded the flying saucer to rise into the air and fly away. The flying saucer moved at tremendous speed, followed by a hurricane that seemed to be deliberately chasing the saucer and the people inside it. A soldier watching through binoculars shouted, "They did it! They left the flying saucer behind." He ordered his subordinates to continue directing heat into the storm, increasing the temperature difference for thermal convection. Yanwen was right. This storm was created artificially, specifically to force him to act. The ruins were 20 kilometers away. That was where the storm had driven the flying saucer. The military officer ordered his men to find it there and capture it. A group of soldiers went to the ruins to carry out the order. Soon, one of the soldiers sensed something was wrong and told his commander that he had already been to this place. The others agreed. They had been walking around in circles there for a week. It was a strange, enchanted place, and most likely they would die there. The lieutenant colonel did not want to listen to his subordinates whining and ordered them to split into 4 groups. The one that found the flying saucer would return and lead the others out. Ignoring their advice, the lieutenant colonel remained alone, while the others dispersed in search of the saucer. Soon something flashed behind a rock, and the lieutenant colonel became alert. After a while, something flashed on the other side, and the lieutenant colonel became clearly alarmed. He demanded that something be found. One of the girls hoped to find the plate first so she could examine the ruins from above and find the commander's team. Jin was frightened. She understood why the storm was chasing their company. Yang Yuan understood that someone was trying to contact them, but he couldn't understand how the flow and direction of the storm was being controlled. The young man tried to come up with a brilliant plan, and it seemed to work. He took the air cooler and decided to cool the air around them to cause convection due to the temperature difference. Jin was skeptical. The hurricane had already swept away many instruments, including the cooler, but Yuan told her to hold on tight. They would be able to fight the storm to the end. To carry out the plan, they had to fly as close as possible to the center of the hurricane. Jin was alarmed, thinking that they would die if they got too close to the center. Yuan reassured her. There was no airflow at the center of the hurricane, so they would not be swept away. From the outside, it looked like madness, but the flying saucer stopped being blown by the wind and flew at full speed into the hurricane. The girls were scared and in pain from the gusts of wind. It felt like their bodies were about to be torn apart. Yuan understood that the problem was the low pressure inside the tornado. He pulled Yi close to him so that she would not be carried away by the wind. The young man tensed, realizing that they had to hold on until they broke through the wind currents and reached the center of the hurricane. The soldiers controlling the storm noticed that they couldn't find the flying saucer, even though it clearly hadn't fallen. Otherwise, they would have heard an explosion. The soldier with the binoculars' eyes bulged. The saucer seemed to be hiding inside the storm. He gave the order to increase the flow so that the saucer could not stay there for long. As soon as it flew out, it would be shot down. It was clear that the people in the saucer would not last long. Of course, they would have liked to get the saucer intact, because they still needed to find the commander. But it was more important to simply catch the guy who had created such fiery power. Finally, the group flew into the tornado, and everyone noticed that the storm had subsided. The wind was no longer trying to throw them out of the basket. The air pressure had returned to normal and was much better. However, they couldn't stay here for long. Yi felt that the storm was only getting stronger, and they needed to find a way to deal with it urgently. Yuan had an idea. He took out his artifact revolver. Jin was skeptical, believing that the power of the gun would not be enough to cope with the storm. Yuan explained that they would not be dealing with the storm directly. The plan was to shoot at the ground, and the force of the object's inertia would throw the fiery flying saucer out of the hurricane. The girls were proud of their clever comrade and stood behind him. The strength of his armor was supposed to block some of the damage from the future explosion. Yen really hoped that the plan would work. The artifact worked. There was a powerful explosion directed at the ground. The girls were really scared and clung tightly to Yuan's body. Jian was worried. The basket was too low, and this height might not be enough. But Yuan asked them not to panic, saying that everything would be fine. The explosion on the ground was very powerful and occurred directly under the flying saucer. It became incredibly hot, and it was difficult to breathe. Yin understood that they needed to get out of this trap as soon as possible. The alarmed soldiers creating the storm did not understand where the explosion came from. They had not detonated anything. But then they saw a flying saucer fly out of the epicenter of the storm, literally thrown upward. Yin was pleased with the power of the gun. It turned out to be stronger than the huge flying saucer. The military gave the order to fire cannons at the flying saucer. He sensed the approaching danger and managed to warn Yuan to duck. A shell flew right over their heads, hitting the flying saucer's hull and damaging it. Yang Yuan was literally shocked by such audacity. He pointed his pistol and addressed the attackers. "How dare you attack me from behind?" The young man had no intention of being polite. He opened fire, and the military's cannon was blown to smithereens. In response, the soldiers announced that they had been attacked and prepared to use a huge grenade launcher. The next explosion also hit its target, and the flying saucer was damaged, forcing it to make an emergency landing shortly thereafter. Yuan was upset, to say the least, realizing that the military had damaged his aircraft. He tried to quickly figure out how to minimize the damage. In addition, the young man and his friends were in a hanging basket and could be hit by a shot or explosion at any moment. The young man asked Yi to find a suitable place to land. Soon the girl found a flat open area and showed it to her friend. The soldiers watched the flying saucer's flight with satisfaction. It had been damaged and was clearly losing speed and altitude. The soldiers rushed to intercept the saucer, which was supposed to land nearby to prevent Yuan from escaping. The landing was rough. The flying saucer crashed into the ground, raising a huge cloud of dust and stones. The people realized how dangerous the landing had been. It was painful to be thrown around and land on rocks, but everyone survived, and that was the main thing. Yi looked around, trying to figure out if there was any danger nearby. She didn't spot anything for the next few hours. Yuan and his friends noticed that they had landed near some kind of historical site. It was strange to see ancient buildings. Yuan had seen them before when he was trading with the military. He didn't expect the storm to drag them here. It was unclear what to do with the flying saucer. However, Yuan asked them not to worry. The saucer would repair itself. The only drawback was that the repair process would take a long time, so they would have to stay here until it was finished, as it was already almost dark. He looked around, realizing that the houses in this town were unusual. She had never seen anything like them before. The girl checked the area and noted that it was relatively safe here. Perhaps it was worth going out in search of supplies, since they had lost all their belongings. Yuan was busy repairing the plate and strengthening his abilities. He allowed the girls to go in search of supplies, but strictly instructed them not to go too far and to return before dark. Quite a bit of time passed. The girls were tired and seemed to have lost their way. A place similar to where they had landed appeared before them again. Perhaps they were in a new city. From the radar image of the fiery flying saucer, Yuan realized that it was the same city. He suggested looking at the main gate, but there was no gate in front of them, and they were still standing near the flying saucer. The young man realized that something was leading them in circles, literally fooling them. Jian suggested trying a few more routes, thinking that perhaps they had missed a turn, although Yuan no longer believed this was the case. He tried all directions, but as soon as they reached a certain point, the geolocation reset. It became clear that the group had fallen into a trap. The situation was strange. Yian hoped that nothing bad would happen to them, but then the girls saw unfamiliar creatures on the stone city wall. They were the same strange creatures with horns on their heads. Jin had never seen such monsters before, didn't know who they were, and judging by their appearance, they seemed to be dead. One noticed that he couldn't see these creatures at all in the flying saucer, and even the buildings had disappeared. The young man rushed to the saucer, saying that they needed to get inside urgently and find a way to escape the vicious circle, even despite the damage to the craft. He knew that the flying saucer had an emergency device. It worked poorly, but 10 minutes would be enough. Everyone got back into the basket. Sure enough, Yuan was able to lift the saucer into the air despite the damage, and the basket with the people flew away. Jean looked at the flying machine with concern. It seemed to her that the hole and crack in the hull were getting bigger. But it turned out that there were more serious problems. The saucer could not get out of the zone. The entire area was covered by an invisible shield. It seemed that they would have to fight ghosts because simply escaping would not be possible. At that moment, something scratched its claws against the hull of the box in which the company was located. Jin turned her head and was horrified to see who was attacking their basket. It turned out that there were many of these creatures. They were vicious with sharp claws and fanged teeth, and they could fly or jump high. Yang realized that it was time to launch the missiles from the flying saucer and activated this function. A barrage of rockets rained down on the creatures, who tried to dodge them with wild screams. Yuan and the girls noticed that these creatures were able to dodge, but there was good news. They were frightened by the rockets and would probably be afraid of other attacks. Wen sent another barrage of missiles to destroy or at least damage the protective sphere. It soon became clear that the flying saucer had reached its maximum capacity and was forced to make an emergency landing. The saucer was never fully repaired. The flying saucer made another emergency landing, and with it the basket with Yuan and the girls. This time the saucer landed right in the town square, raising clouds of dust and smoke around it. Yen and Jan were very frightened, but Yen tried to cheer them up. He pulled out his gun and suggested they quickly leave such a conspicuous position. The strange creatures were also nearby. They silently watched what was happening and saw the saucer land nearby. Yen realized that these monsters did not leave the city limits. On the one hand, this made the situation easier. But on the other hand, the people couldn't leave the city, and the creatures had already noticed them. It turned out that they were trapped. The fiery saucer was damaged, but its guns were still operational. The young man had no intention of giving up. In the worst case, he was ready to cover everything around him in blood. He opened the protective doors, exposing the missiles to public view. The unfamiliar creatures became alarmed, and soon the entire area was covered in thick smoke or fog. It became difficult to breathe. Yi didn't understand why these creatures didn't just run away if they were afraid of rockets. Yen knew that the missiles had a long range and the creatures would not have time to hide, but he did not understand how they knew this. The young man suggested setting up camp first and then watching further developments. He understood that it was impossible to get people out of the city yet, especially while the saucer was being repaired. Yen thought, someone forced them to fly here, and it was most likely part of someone's plan. Suddenly, stones began to rain down on them. Yuan managed to shield the girls with his armor, but questions about who was behind all this did not leave his mind. Suddenly, a group of familiar fighters appeared in front of him, still as cheerful, and slightly dim-witted as ever. This time, Yuan was even glad to see them. These guys could come in handy in the current situation. The group recognized Yuan and remembered that it was better not to quarrel with him, so they decided to return underground, saying that they were doing fine as it was. Yuan grabbed one of the men, the leader of the group, by the collar and demanded that he stay. He wanted to know what was really going on here, but the guys replied that they didn't understand either. They were just following the main force, and it seemed they would never be able to get out of this area. The fighters said that they had to muster up their courage to gather supplies and were almost crushed by a large flying saucer that fell from the sky. Fortunately, they managed to escape. The main force was here, along with the ghosts that were trapped. Now everyone was locked in this strange town. Yen realized that even the troops in the safety zone couldn't leave. It was a real nightmare. At this time, events were unfolding inside the safety zone. The military noticed that the fog on the radar had completely disappeared. It seemed like great news and the fog had receded. Lieutenant Colonel Chen no longer understood what was happening, but he assumed that it might be an escape. The ghosts had encountered the enemies they feared. Suddenly, the door to the command room burst open and General Hu entered. Everyone greeted the commander and asked why he had come himself. The general replied that they were not concerned about the ghosts. If they launched an invasion, the ghosts would retreat on their own. Indeed, the ghosts retreated, probably encountering enemies dangerous to themselves. The lieutenant colonel reported that, in addition to ghosts, other creatures or people could also pose a threat, which could also be dangerous for the borders of the sphere. He asked if they could break through the sphere with a large number of individuals. The general said that this question was not relevant at the moment. The space inside the sphere was blocked. The general ordered drones to be sent out to try to find the enemy. After that, he disappeared into space. The lieutenant colonel perked up and ordered his men to do their best to find the source of the threat that had forced the ghost to retreat. The 5 fighters listened to Yuan's orders and swore eternal allegiance to him. He asked them to hurry and contact him as soon as they found a safe zone so they could exchange important information with the military. The men disappeared underground to carry out their orders. Yuan understood that there must be more information about this place in the safe zone and hoped to obtain useful data. The settling in was over. The portable house was dismantled. Yen informed the girls that it would take about half a month to repair the flying saucer. Wei noticed that water had collected in the box with the coolers. Indeed, it was clean, clear, cool water. Jin couldn't believe it and immediately began drinking it by the handful. Wen checked the local data. Low temperature and high humidity explained the accumulated moisture. But another idea came to his mind. The temperature difference between cold and heat could create a tornado. Even the damaged fire plate could leave this area with its help. The young man laid out coolers under the saucer's hull. He gave the command to lift the saucer, and it hovered above the ground. It rose high into the sky, but suddenly began to spin strangely. Jin suggested that the saucer was falling instead of flying, and Yuan decided to check the readings. A group of soldiers ran across the rocky terrain, trying to find the fallen saucer. They had spent a lot of time here, but found nothing. Perhaps the saucer had fallen into the ruins? Suddenly, the soldiers felt a wind that came out of nowhere. Soon they saw the saucer rising, hoping that the commander had found it and would rescue them. But before the soldiers' eyes, the saucer fell again, raising huge columns of dust and stones. The soldiers did not know what to do. One suggested that someone was trying to push the saucer out with a tornado, but the regiment commander did not understand, which meant that the saucer still did not belong to them. The soldiers had a chance to get it back, so they decided to take the plate and give it to the commander. The chief struck the guy who said it wouldn't work, because they had already done enough but still couldn't get out of the stone prison. The leader replied that they had no superpowers, only some kind of space box with small weapons. What would they do when their supplies ran out? Without a large army, they would not survive. The soldier realized that the leader was right. If they could find and retrieve the fire plate, it would be a great achievement. The soldier understood that the safe zone was on the edge of the ruins. Even if they didn't find the saucer, they could get to the safe zone and escape the trap. Another soldier asked if he could expect a promotion if he learned more about the plate. Now was not the time to think about it, but why not? Suddenly, the saucer appeared before the soldier's eyes. Everything turned out to be simpler. There was a bonfire nearby, and all the lamps were turned off. A girl was standing guard, apparently watching over the saucer. The soldiers had a chance. The commander ordered the laser guns to be brought out and turned on the cube, which began to reformat right in his hands. Soon, the soldiers had modern, powerful weapons, and they were going to put on a real show. Suddenly, Yi sensed impending danger. The girl jumped up and called out to Yuan, shouting that the enemies were attacking. At that moment, the military opponents were instantly destroyed. Those few seconds were enough for Yuan to pack the portable house into a suitcase and sit down, using the protective shield. The soldiers were stunned to see the base fold into a suitcase. They decided not to save their ammunition, but to use everything against Yuan and the girls. There was no point in being afraid. Yuan took out his artifact pistol. He understood that the attack was sudden, and perhaps these people had created the storm themselves. Yin decided not to hesitate and activated the pistol, firing at the military's protective dome. The protective sphere was very strong. It seemed impossible to break it, even with the most powerful cannon. But a new problem arose. The pistol broke, and the next shot destroyed the protective sphere. Yang Yuan approached the enemies, stepped on the throat of one of the soldiers, and declared that his gun was a premium item, and now he would talk to them frankly.